A signal of panic ripples through the scientific community. Imagine this: a vast, silent object drifting across the black canvas of interstellar space. Suddenly, against all odds, shifts its path not by accident, not by some random perturbation, but in a way that seems deliberate. And the new trajectory is leading it closer, closer, toward Earth. This is not a trailer for a science fiction movie. This is a story that is unfolding now, in real time, and tonight, as you let your mind drift into sleep, we'll take you into this mystery. A story that feels almost too impossible to believe, yet it is happening, right above our heads. So let's settle in, breathe slowly, and let the tale of 3i Atlas carry you into a world between science and the unknown. The universe has always whispered to us in ways subtle and strange. Stars flicker, galaxies drift apart, comets sweep through the sky like ancient messengers, and every so often, something unexpected arrives at our doorstep. 3i Atlas is one of those visitors, one of the few known interstellar objects ever detected within our solar system. It is not from here, not bound to the sun like the planets and asteroids that share our cosmic neighborhood. It comes from the deep out there, beyond the edge of the Milky Way's familiar arms, a wanderer adrift among the stars. And when scientists first saw it, they expected it to behave like a rock, a lump of frozen dust and ice, no different from comets that have visited us for billions of years. But that assumption, like so many others, would soon begin to unravel. When 1i Oumuamua was first spotted in 2017, astronomers were caught off guard. It was elongated, shaped almost like a cigar or a pancake depending on how you imagined it, and it moved in ways that didn't quite add up. A few years later, 2i Borisov made its passage, looking far more like a traditional comet, leaving behind the familiar trail of glowing gas. And then came 3i Atlas III, and by far the most enigmatic. It was discovered by the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS, the network of telescopes scanning the skies for objects that might collide with Earth. The irony, of course, is that this object, originally flagged as just another comet, would become the focus of a fear unlike any comet before. At first, everything seemed routine. The object was tracked, its orbit calculated, and astronomers plotted where it would be months and years ahead. It was expected to sweep by Mars, maybe swing a little closer toward the inner solar system, and then be ejected back into the darkness of interstellar space, never to return. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, something unusual began to happen. The orbit didn't quite match the predictions. The trajectory shifted, not dramatically, but just enough to raise eyebrows. Scientists are trained to notice tiny deviations. In orbital mechanics, precision is everything. A slight wobble, a small difference in velocity, a tiny change in the path can mean that something is exerting influence, something unaccounted for. Perhaps a jet of gas escaping from the comet's surface, or gravitational nudges from planets not fully factored into the equations. But when 3i Atlas's course began to diverge in a consistent, steady way, toward a direction that brought it uncomfortably closer to Earth, a chill spread through observatories across the world. Picture a group of astronomers sitting in the control room of a telescope, the faint glow of monitors reflecting off their faces as the new data comes in. At first, they think it's a glitch, maybe a calibration error. They run the numbers again, then cross-check with data from telescopes on the other side of the globe. The result is the same. 3i Atlas has changed course. Not just a little, enough that the models must be rewritten. Enough that Earth is suddenly not just a bystander, but a potential destination in the story of this interstellar traveler. And here, in the quiet darkness of your room, as you let the calm of night surround you, imagine that feeling, a collective shiver running down the spines of some of the brightest minds on Earth. This is not how rocks behave. This is not how chunks of frozen dust and ice are supposed to move. Something is off. Something is wrong, or perhaps, something is trying to get our attention. Now, of course, scientists are cautious. They don't leap to wild conclusions, no matter how tempting. They search for natural explanations first. They wonder if perhaps solar radiation pressure is nudging it, the gentle push of sunlight against its surface, or perhaps jets of gas are erupting from cracks in its crust, pushing it like tiny thrusters. Yet with each calculation, each attempt to explain, the truth becomes harder to dismiss. The change in course doesn't fit the patterns they know. It feels too consistent, too directional, almost as if the object has chosen a new target, and that target is us. The media hasn't caught on yet. These discussions, these late-night debates over coffee in observatories and research labs, are still whispers, still buried in academic circles. But soon, the story will leak. Soon, headlines will scream that scientists are panicking, that an interstellar object is barreling toward Earth. But tonight, here, in the soft rhythm of this narrative, we're not panicking. We're observing, listening, and imagining what it means to live in a moment where the universe itself seems to be rewriting the script. For now, 3i Atlas drifts silently in the void, a small speck against the infinite black. It doesn't glow, it doesn't roar like a rocket, It doesn't announce itself with spectacle. It is subtle, almost invisible, save for the telescopes that track its every motion. Yet that subtlety makes it all the more unsettling. Because sometimes, the quietest things are the ones with the loudest implications. And as you breathe slowly, letting your body sink into rest, consider this. If something from another star system can change course, deliberately or otherwise, then perhaps the universe is not as empty as we thought. Perhaps 3IATLAS carries secrets not of this world. Perhaps, just perhaps, it is not a visitor by chance, but a messenger with purpose. Tonight, we begin this story at the moment the shift was first noticed. The numbers didn't add up. The path curved, ever so slightly, but undeniably, toward us. And for the first time, scientists felt something they rarely admit. Fear. Not just curiosity, not just wonder, but fear. Because in all the endless sky above, in all the billions of stars and planets, why would something from the deep darkness choose to aim itself at Earth? So let's follow that thought, gently, calmly. As the night grows deeper, let's imagine the data flowing in, the quiet conversations, the tension beneath the surface. And as we drift into the next part of this journey, remember, this is not a story of panic for you. This is a story of perspective, of mystery, and of the strange, wondrous, and sometimes unsettling ways the universe reminds us that we are never truly alone. When the first whispers began to circulate among astronomers, they were hesitant to use dramatic words. Deviation, they said, or anomalous trajectory. But beneath the cautious language, an unspoken tension simmered. For those who understood orbital mechanics, who lived and breathed celestial motion, the implications were clear. Something had nudged 3I Atlas off its predicted path, and the nudging wasn't random. It was deliberate in its direction, a slow curve aimed toward the one blue planet that hung in the dark Earth. The first to notice were not the famous institutions, not NASA or the European Southern Observatory, but small teams scattered across the globe. An observatory in Hawaii, perched high above the ocean, noticed the math no longer lined up. A university telescope in Chile confirmed the same. In Spain, amateur astronomers compared notes with colleagues in Australia, and each came to the same conclusion. The numbers were shifting. The cometif, it could even be called, that was misbehaving. At first they thought it must be out. When a comet's icy surface warms in sunlight, gases escape, creating jets that act like tiny thrusters, pushing the object ever so slightly. We've seen it countless times. But when those jets occur, the motion is erratic. It wobbles, it stutters, it looks messy, unpredictable. Yet 3I Atlas was doing none of that. Its course was bending with unnerving consistency, as if guided by an invisible hand. Imagine standing on a beach at night, watching a boat drift on the tide. You expect it to bob and sway, pushed here and there by currents. But instead, it begins to glide in a straight line, directly toward you. You can't see the engine. You don't hear the hum of a motor. Yet you know something is steering it. That was the sensation astronomers felt as they plotted the points of 3I Atlas across the sky. Still, they kept the panic quiet. Science thrives on caution. They needed more data, more measurements, more time. But time was exactly what seemed to be slipping away. Every night, the course correction grew more obvious. Every observation reinforced the fear. Earth was no longer a bystander. We had become a potential destination. And here, as you rest, letting your breathing slow, think of the silence of space itself. Out there, 3IATLAS drifted with no sound, no announcement. A speck of light against infinite darkness, shifting slightly closer with every passing hour. It's easy to forget that space is not a still picture, but a living dance of motion. Everything orbiting, colliding, escaping, drifting. And yet, when one partner in that dance changes its steps, our eyes cannot look away. Behind the scenes, private conversations unfolded. Astronomers sent encrypted emails, scheduled emergency meetings, and compared data streams in the dead of night. They were not ready for the public to know. Not because they wanted to hide the truth, but because they themselves were not ready to accept it. The thought was too strange. Could an interstellar object have intention? Could it, in any way, behave as though it were more than rock and ice? You can almost hear the debates. One scientist insists, it must be out. Another shakes their head, pointing at the clean linear shift. No, this is something else. Someone suggests gravitational influence, but the maps of the solar system are precise. There is no nearby planet massive enough to bend its path this way. And so the room falls quiet, heavy with the weight of what no one wants to say aloud. What if it is not natural? In those moments, humanity brushes against its oldest fear and oldest hope, the possibility that we are not alone. For centuries, we've gazed at the stars and wondered. Stories, myths, religions, and science fiction have all circled the same question. Is there anyone out there? And now, with 3IATLAS curving ever closer, that question is no longer abstract. It is tangible, it is pressing, it is arriving. Of course, the public would not hear of this yet. Headlines still focused on other things. Politics, storms, ordinary comets dazzling across the sky. The calm before the storm. But in quiet corners of the scientific world, tension grew like a low hum in the background. Because if the object continued on this course, the world would eventually notice. And when it did, panic would not be so easy to contain. And as you drift deeper into rest, let your mind imagine that strange duality, a planet going about its daily life. Billions of people unaware, while above them, across the cold distances of space, a visitor adjusted its path. Silent, steady, unyielding, a messenger, perhaps, or a threat, we do not yet know. Yet in this moment of unknowing, there is beauty too, the kind of beauty that comes from mystery. For every answer science has given us, it has also opened new doors. We have measured the age of the universe, traced the birth of stars, mapped the structure of galaxies. And yet, here we are, once again humbled by a single object, drifting toward us with questions we cannot yet answer. So let yourself float with those questions, softly, gently, not to panic, but to wonder, to remember that even in an age of satellites and smartphones, the cosmos still has the power to surprise us, to make us feel small, and to remind us that the story of the universe is far from finished. And somewhere, even now, 3IATLAS continues on its path, curving slowly, silently, toward the world we call home. The night skies became the canvas upon which this drama unfolded, but for most people, it looked no different than before. The stars still glimmered in their familiar constellations. The moon still waxed and waned, and nothing in the quiet heavens suggested that anything extraordinary was happening. And yet, beyond the reach of the naked eye, a small, unremarkable point of light was changing its destiny and perhaps ours. The astronomers who tracked 3IATLAs began to describe the sensation as eerie. Numbers, after all, are supposed to be comforting. Equations give order to chaos, predictability to what seems unknowable. But when the numbers themselves begin to whisper of something uncanny, that order collapses. Each new observation confirmed the same story. The trajectory was bending closer, closer, with a precision that mocked explanation. In hushed voices, some of them recalled Oumuamua, the first interstellar visitor. That object had been strange enough, elongating in shape, moving with a non-gravitational push that still sparks debate today. Some had even dared to suggest it was a probe, or a fragment of alien technology. But Oumuamua never turned its gaze toward Earth. It simply passed by, a ghostly wanderer. 31ATLAS, however, seemed different. It was not passing by. It was approaching. Picture yourself at the edge of a forest at dusk. Most creatures move randomly, birds dart, insects buzz, leaves fall at the mercy of the wind. But then, from deep within the trees, a shadow begins to move not randomly, but directly toward you. That feeling, primal and undeniable, is what the scientists felt when they plotted the arc of this cosmic traveler. Still, they clung to rationality. They repeated the mantra. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Perhaps a fragment had broken off, subtly changing its balance. Perhaps pressure from sunlight, invisible, yet relentless, had nudged it with surprising strength. They tested these theories, ran simulations, adjusted parameters. But in the quiet glow of their monitors, the curve remained stubborn and deliberate. And so a kind of silence settled across the scientific community. Not a silence of ignorance, but of restraint. They did not rush to announce, they did not stir public fear. Instead, they watched, waited, and held their breath. Because sometimes, the most terrifying truth is not shouted from rooftops, it is whispered, almost reverently, among those who glimpse it first. Meanwhile, life on Earth continued, blissfully unaware. People went to work, children played in parks. Couples walked beneath the stars, never knowing that one of those stars concealed a visitor changing its path. There is something almost poetic in that contrast to everyday, ordinary life unfolding while, above, the extraordinary prepares to enter our story. For you, listening now in the stillness of your own night, there is no reason to panic. Instead, there is reason to wonder, to let your thoughts wander like travelers themselves, drifting out into that vast darkness where 3IATLAS sails. Imagine the quiet coldness of its surface. A surface that has journeyed untold distances, seen stars you and I will never see, crossed voids that could swallow entire galaxies. And now, that surface reflects the faint light of our sun, curving gently in our direction. Scientists sometimes describe such objects as relics, fossils from the birth of other star systems. They are fragments of creation, messengers carrying the stories of distant suns. And yet, when one of those messengers begins to behave in ways we do not expect, the story becomes less about the past and more about the future. What lies ahead, no one can yet say. Perhaps 3I will veer again, pulled by forces we have not yet calculated. Perhaps it will pass us by, offering nothing more than data and mystery. Or perhaps it will continue, steady and sure, until its path intersects with our own. Whatever the outcome, this moment, this recognition that something vast and alien has adjusted its course toward us marks a turning point in how we see the universe. And so, As you allow your body to sink deeper into rest, remember that the universe is alive with motion, with secrets, with stories still unfolding. 31 ATLAS is just one thread in that great tapestry, one traveler among countless billions. But for now, it is our traveler. It is our mystery. And as the night embraces you, let that mystery cradle your imagination, gentle and vast, until dreams carry you further still. For in the silence of the cosmos, sometimes the loudest message is not a voice at all, but the simple act of turning, of changing direction, of choosing whether by chance or design to come closer. And that is where our story begins. When astronomers first laid eyes on 3I ATLAS, it did not appear to be anything more than a faint streak of light, a distant traveler slipping silently into the pages of our cosmic ledger. It was discovered not through some dramatic flash across the heavens, but through patient observation, the kind of nightly ritual that has defined human curiosity for centuries. Small telescopes peered into the velvet sky, and within the wash of starlight, a faint point shifted, moving not in the rhythm of the planets, not in the dance of nearby asteroids, but along a path that betrayed its alien origin. The moment of recognition is often subtle in astronomy. Unlike the sudden discoveries in stories and films, real breakthroughs happen quietly, when data points align in just the right way. For 3I ATLAS, it was the peculiar speed, the odd trajectory, the undeniable realization that this object was not born of our sun, like Oumuamua before it, and Borisov shortly after. 3.1. Atlas bore the unmistakable signature of an interstellar traveler, messenger from another star system, carrying secrets older than humanity itself. At first, there was a sense of wonder. Interstellar objects are exceedingly rare, at least in terms of detection. Our galaxy may be filled with them, drifting endlessly, but the chance of one wandering close enough to be seen is astronomically slim. And so, each one we catch a glimpse of feels like a gift, a fragment of some distant world delivered to our doorstep. Astronomers gave it the designation 3I ATLAS, marking it as the third interstellar object confirmed to have entered our solar system. Already, that placed it in a category so small that every detail mattered. Its discovery reminded many of the night in 2017 when Oumuamua first entered our awareness. That elongated, tumbling fragment had startled the world. With its strange acceleration and inexplicable shape, the debates still echo today. Was it a shard of rock, or something far stranger? Then came Borisov in 2019, more like a traditional comet trailing gas and dust, leaving behind a story that felt more familiar, if no less impressive. And then, as if the cosmos had grown accustomed to dropping these gifts, came 3I ATLAS. But from the beginning, this new traveler felt different. Its brightness shifted in unusual ways, as though its surface was uneven, fractured, or composed of materials we did not fully understand. Its path was uncertain, bending through the outer reaches of our system, weaving past gravitational fields with a grace that seemed almost intentional. To the public, it was just another name, another number, a curiosity in the endless flood of astronomical discoveries. But to those watching closely, 3I Atlas whispered something else, a riddle, waiting to be solved. Imagine standing on the shore of an ancient ocean. For centuries, you have watched driftwood wash ashore. Broken branches, fragments of ships, ordinary relics of faraway places. And then one day, a bottle arrives, sealed tightly, with markings you cannot read. You don't know who sent it, or from where, but you know immediately that it is different. That is what 3I Atlas felt like. A messenger, intentional or not, carrying with it a mystery too big to ignore. As weeks passed, telescopes around the world turned their gaze toward this interstellar guest. Observatories in Hawaii, Chile, and Spain gathered light, converting photons into data, lines into graphs, graphs into meaning. In those numbers lay hints of composition, ice perhaps, rock certainly, maybe even metals unknown to Earth. Each detail added to the growing portrait, but the portrait never felt complete. There was always something missing, a gap between the data and the intuition of those who studied it. For the scientists, the excitement was tempered with caution. They had learned from Oumuamua how speculation could spiral out of control, how the hunger for extraordinary explanations could overshadow careful science. And so, they measured their words, choosing restraint over headlines. But behind closed doors, the conversations carried a weight that was hard to disguise. Something about 3I Atlas felt alive, not in the biological sense, but in the way it moved, in the way it defied their expectations. Perhaps that is what makes interstellar objects so haunting. They are not just rocks. They are emissaries from places we will never see, pieces of systems we can only imagine. Each one is a reminder that our solar system is not alone, that the stars beyond are not silent, but busy, full of creation and destruction, scattering their fragments into the sea of space. And now, one of those fragments had arrived here, brushing against our world in a way that demanded our attention. As you listen, let yourself imagine what it might be like to stand upon the surface of 3I Atlas. The silence would be absolute, broken only by the distant hum of cosmic radiation. The horizon would stretch endlessly, a barren landscape lit faintly by the faraway glow of our sun. Tiny grains of dust, frozen in time, would crunch beneath your feet. You would look up, and instead of familiar constellations, you would see the universe from a perspective no human eye has ever known. This was a fragment of another world, and yet, somehow, it was here, with us. The early days of its discovery were filled with optimism. Here was another chance to study the universe in miniature, to peel back the layers of creation, to glimpse the ingredients of distant star systems. But beneath that optimism was unease, for even then, even in those first observations, there were signs that 3I Atlas was not content to drift passively. Its journey had only just begun, and what awaited us was a story far stranger than anyone could have expected. As more observations of 3I Atlas accumulated, the portrait of this strange traveler grew sharper, though never fully clear. Its brightness fluctuated in ways that puzzled astronomers. Normally, when a comet-like body approaches a star, solar radiation causes gases to escape, creating a luminous tail that brightens predictably. But 3I Atlas seemed to dim and flare in no consistent rhythm, as if its surface was irregular, fractured, or hiding pockets of material that erupted unexpectedly. Each spike in brightness was like a heartbeat, faint but undeniable, hinting at a life of its own. The shape of the object added another layer of mystery. While Borisov had resembled a comet in most respects, with a relatively spherical nucleus and a familiar tail, 3I Atlas resisted such neat categorization. Data suggested it was elongated, perhaps cigar-shaped like Oumuamua, though not as extreme. Some even speculated it was broken into fragments, loosely bound by gravity, tumbling as it moved. To the human mind, such descriptions conjured images of a shattered spacecraft, pieces of something ancient and ruined, drifting together in the void. Of course, the scientists cautioned against such flights of imagination, but once an idea like that takes root, it is hard to ignore. Its velocity also raised questions. Traveling at tens of kilometers per second, it carried the unmistakable momentum of something born far from our sun. Yet, unlike many passing objects, it seemed to adjust in subtle ways, as though nudged by forces invisible to us. Some chalked this up to outgassing the release of sublimating ice that could act like tiny thrusters. But others noticed that the changes were too steady, too precise, to fit the chaotic pattern of natural outbursts. It was as though the object was steering, ever so gently, on a course of its choosing. Astronomers pride themselves on explaining the heavens through patterns. Stars follow predictable cycles, planets trace precise orbits, and comets adhere to the timeless rules of gravity and thermodynamics. 3I Atlas, however, seemed to play by different rules. It was like a guest who entered a ballroom, acknowledged the music, and then danced to a rhythm entirely its own. Comparisons to Oumuamua grew louder. That first interstellar visitor had also confounded expectations, accelerating away from the sun in ways no one could fully explain. Some proposed hydrogen ice, invisible yet powerful, as the culprit. Others whispered of alien probes disguised as rocks. Now, with 3I Atlas displaying its own peculiarities, the echoes of those debates returned with renewed force. Was this a pattern? Were these visitors not just accidents, but part of a larger story unfolding? To the public, the details seemed abstract elongation, light curves, albedo measurements, but beneath the jargon lay something profoundly simple. This was no ordinary rock. Its behavior demanded attention, and with each passing week, that attention sharpened into unease. The scientific papers grew cautious in tone, but between the lines, one could sense the tension. There is only so long you can call something anomalous before the word itself becomes a placeholder for fear. Imagine watching a candle flicker in a dark room. At first, you think nothing of it, the air is shifting, the flame is natural. But then you realize the flicker matches your own breath, rising and falling in time with you. That is what the scientists felt as they charted the irregularities of 3I Atlas. The object seemed to respond, to move with an intelligence that was not supposed to exist in cold stone and ice. At night, observatories continued their silent vigil. Telescopes swept the heavens, collecting photons that had traveled across unimaginable distances, bouncing off a surface no human hand would ever touch. Each image was a message, each graph a whisper, building toward a story that grew stranger with every chapter. For the astronomers, exhaustion blended with fascination. They knew they were witnessing something historic, and yet, history has a way of unsettling the present. For you listening now, perhaps curled in bed, eyes heavy with sleep, imagine this picture in your mind. A dark object drifting against a backdrop of stars, its surface scarred by eons of travel, fractured in ways we can scarcely imagine. It tumbles, slow and silent, yet each turn glints with strange patterns of light, as if revealing a code written in the language of physics itself. This code, still undeciphered, is what draws humanity closer in thought, even as the object itself drifts closer in space. As the data mounted, the comparisons stretched further. Some astronomers likened it to a derelict vessel abandoned long ago, wandering the currents of interstellar space. Others pictured it as a shard of a planet shattered in some distant cataclysm, hurled outward into the galaxy like an orphan of creation. Whatever its origin, 3IATLAS carried with it a strangeness that refused to be explained away. And so, late into the night, scientists debated. Was it a comet without a tail? An asteroid with hidden ice? A fragment of something we had no words for yet? The answers shifted like shadows, never settling into certainty. But through it all, one truth became clear. 3IATLAS was unlike anything we had seen before. That realization alone was enough to unsettle even the calmest minds. For in the great story of the universe, the most haunting chapters are not the ones we can explain, but the ones that leave us questioning the very rules we thought we understood. As the weeks turned into months, the strangeness of 3I Atlas became harder to contain within the walls of observatories and academic papers. What had begun as a whisper among scientists soon spilled, cautiously, into the broader world. Reports filtered into journals, carefully worded to avoid sensationalism. Yet even in their restraint, the words carried weight. Anomalous brightness variations, unexpected trajectory deviations, unclassified morphology. To the average reader, these phrases sounded distant and clinical. But to those who understood, they were signals, hints that something extraordinary was unfolding just beyond our sight. The scientific community is, by nature, cautious. Every claim is tested, peer-reviewed, and debated. But behind the measured tones of conferences and publications, there was a quiet undercurrent of unease. They remembered Oumuamua and how quickly speculation about alien technology had ignited. No one wanted a repeat of that frenzy. No one wanted to be accused of chasing shadows. And yet, denying the unusual nature of 3I Atlas felt dishonest. It was as though the universe itself had delivered them a puzzle, and to look away would be to squander the rarest of gifts. For the public, when the news finally surfaced in snippets and soundbites, the story was tantalizing but abstract. Another interstellar object. Headlines read, "Rare visitor from beyond our solar system." Some articles likened it to Oumuamua, others to Borisov, framing it as part of a growing collection of cosmic anomalies. Yet buried in the fine print were details that caught the eye of amateur astronomers, skywatchers, and dreamers. The irregular flares of light, the unusual trajectory, the possibility that it was unlike any natural object catalogued before. And once those details slipped into the public imagination, they spread quickly, like sparks on dry grass. Conversations emerged late at night in online forums, where enthusiasts speculated on what 3I Atlas might be. Some believed it was nothing more than an oddly shaped rock, behaving just within the limits of natural explanation. Others, less cautious, wondered aloud whether it was a probe, a vessel, or even a message. For most, these ideas were little more than comforting fantasies, stories that brought a sense of drama to an otherwise cold and indifferent cosmos. But for a few, the fascination became something deeper, a feeling that perhaps the object was not just passing by, but watching. Among the scientists, the question of its origin dominated debates. Was it ejected from the birth of another star system, billions of years ago, wandering the void ever since? If so, what could its composition tell us about the diversity of worlds beyond our own? Or had it been born of something more violent, a planetary collision, a shattered moon, a catastrophe so immense its fragments were scattered across interstellar space? Each theory painted a different picture, and yet none quite matched the data. And then there was the matter of its silencer. Rather, the silence we expected. In the case of Borisov, instruments had detected gases venting, a familiar sigh of a cometary body reacting to the warmth of the sun. But 3I Atlas remained curiously quiet, its emissions muted, almost absent. It did not sing like a comet, nor did it rest like a rock. It existed in the space between categories, defying the labels that gave scientists comfort. The world at large, however, did not dwell on these subtleties. Life moved on. People went to work, raised families, lived their days beneath skies that looked unchanged. Only those who stared deeply into the heavens understood that a fragment of another system was slipping ever closer, carrying with it questions without answers. For you, lying quietly now, eyes perhaps beginning to close, think of that feeling, the world continuing as normal, while above, something vast and unknowable drifts silently nearer. There is both comfort and unease in that image. Comfort, because the stars have always been indifferent, their mysteries stretching on without end. Unease, because sometimes those mysteries reach back, touching us in ways we do not expect. As the weeks passed, the tone of the observations began to shift. What began as curiosity was giving way to urgency. Each recalculation of the orbit suggested subtle but undeniable changes. It was not just an interstellar object passing through. It was behaving differently, tilting, bending, aligning. At first, the alterations were small, explainable, easily dismissed. But taken together, they told a different story. 3. IATLAS was not moving randomly, it was coming closer. This realization was shared cautiously, almost reluctantly. After all, space is vast, and closer in astronomical terms can still mean millions of miles. But the fact remained, its path was shifting toward Earth's domain. And while no one dared to say what that meant, the implications settled heavily on the minds of those who knew. Imagine yourself sitting at the edge of an immense ocean. Most waves roll past harmlessly, breaking on distant shores. But then one wave, small, at first, begins to grow, rising higher and higher, its path unerringly aimed at where you sit. That was how 3 IATLAs began to appear, not as a harmless wanderer, but as a wave gathering strength, moving with purpose. And so, late into the night, in observatories and research centers across the globe, a quiet truth began to form. This was no ordinary visitor. This was a story still unfolding, one that would draw humanity deeper into questions it was not yet ready to ask. For now, though the sky remains calm, the stars still shine. And as you drift deeper into rest, let the thoughts settle gently. Out there, far beyond your window, a mystery from another world is moving, slow and steady, on a path that brushes ever closer to our own. Its journey is just beginning, and so too is ours. The first hints that something was wrong with 3I Atlas did not come with alarms or flashing warnings. They came quietly, almost timidly, in the numbers. Small deviations, subtle shifts, barely perceptible in the endless spreadsheets of orbital data. For most, these changes would have gone unnoticed. But for the few astronomers who had been watching the object every night, the difference was clear. The line that had once promised a safe passage through the solar system was bending, almost imperceptibly, toward Earth. At first, no one wanted to believe it. Mistakes happen in astronomy all the time: equipment glitches, atmospheric interference, even the simplest human error in calculation. The initial reports were dismissed as anomalies, the kind that could be corrected with more data. Yet night after night, the same story returned. The deviation was real, the course was shifting, and the implications were becoming impossible to ignore. In the observatories where these measurements were taken, a strange quiet settled. Usually, discoveries sparked celebration, the thrill of uncovering something new. But this time, the excitement felt different, muted, heavy, almost somber. Scientists who had spent their lives chasing the mysteries of the stars now found themselves staring at one that stared back. Conversations grew cautious. Emails marked urgent circulated among teams across the globe. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a handful of researchers stayed late into the night, running simulations, watching as their models confirmed the same unsettling truth. In Europe, the European Space Agency conducted its own analyses, and their results matched. Across the world, in Japan, South America, and South Africa, the data arrived at the same conclusion. 3I Atlas was changing its trajectory, and it was moving closer to Earth. Still, no one dared to say the word collision. Not yet. The universe is vast, and closer can still mean millions, even billions of miles away. But the psychological shift had already begun. For decades, interstellar objects had been seen as harmless wanderers, mere curiosities drifting through space. Now, for the first time, one seemed to be drawing nearer, deliberately or not. Imagine being in a quiet room, hearing a faint tapping at the window. At first, you dismiss it as wind, as branches shifting in the breeze. But then the tapping grows steadier, clearer, as though something or someone is there. That was how 3I Atlas began to feel. Not just a distant rock, but a presence, a visitor whose path had changed. In the days that followed, the first emergency meetings were held. Virtual calls connected scientists from every corner of the globe. The tone was serious, voices low, words chosen carefully. Charts were displayed, showing arcs of possible trajectories, shaded regions of uncertainty. Each line, each graph, seemed to whisper the same unsettling thought. The object was not doing what it should. Some argued for caution. Orbital dynamics are complicated, they said. Small perturbations can produce misleading results. It was far too early to raise alarms. Others, however, pointed to the consistency of the data. When multiple observatories, spread across continents, reported the same deviations, the evidence could no longer be brushed aside. And so the tension grew. Scientists are trained to embrace the unknown, to thrive on questions. But they are also human, and in the quiet moments, when the data glowed on their screens, a deeper fear stirred. What if this was not just another anomaly? What if this was the beginning of something far larger than any of them could comprehend? The media, at this stage, knew little. A handful of niche astronomy websites hinted at strange behavior in the interstellar visitor, but the story had not yet broken into headlines. For now, the unease remained confined to the scientific community, contained within their cautious language and late-night discussions. Yet the weight of it was undeniable. Something was unfolding above their heads, and they could not control it. For you listening now, imagine those long nights in the observatories. The hum of computers, the soft glow of monitors, the silence broken only by the scratch of pens on paper and the occasional murmur of disbelief. Outside, the stars shone with their usual serenity, giving no hint of the drama hidden in their midst. And yet, among those watching, a realization was beginning to take hold. 3I Atlas was not just passing through, it was approaching. No one could yet say why. No one could yet say how close it would come, but the certainty that something had shifted was enough to unsettle even the most rational minds. The cosmos, vast and indifferent, had sent them a riddle, and the first clues suggested that the answer would not be simple. The first official meeting to address the change in 3I Atlas's course was held in a windowless conference room at NASA's headquarters. It was midnight in Washington, but screens flickered with faces from every corner of the world. The European Space Agency dialed in from Darmstadt, their analysts pale and tired, still awake under fluorescent lights. Across the ocean, JAXA's representatives spoke from Tokyo, their voices carrying a mixture of composure and unease. In South America, in Cape Town, in Canberra, the same wary faces leaned toward their cameras, united not by distance, but by the same gnawing uncertainty. The meeting began, as most scientific gatherings do, with data. A projection filled the central screen, showing a delicate white curve arcing across a field of black. It represented the object's expected trajectory. What it should have been, beside it, in faint red, was the new line. At first glance, the two paths looked nearly identical, but the difference grew with each plotted day. The red line dipped ever so slightly inward, toward the pale blue dot that marked Earth. The room was quiet. The silence was the kind that follows a truth everyone knows, but no one wants to say aloud. Finally, one of the American analysts spoke, his voice measured. "The deviation is small," he said, "but consistent. Our models suggest the course correction is not random." The word hung in the air, not random. A murmur rippled through the screens. Some immediately objected. "That's speculative," came a voice from Paris. "You can't assign intent to orbital mechanics." Another scientist, dialing in from Santiago, shook her head. "Intent or not, the math is clear. The deviation grows stronger every night. This isn't noise, it's real." They argued, not angrily, but with the desperate urgency of people who understood what was at stake. Slides flicked past, gravitational models, error margins, simulations of near passes. Each scenario ended with the same uneasy conclusion: the object was steering closer to Earth than any interstellar visitor had before. One of the older astronomers, a man who had studied the heavens for 40 years, leaned into his microphone. His voice was calm, but the tremor beneath it betrayed his fear. "If these projections hold, we are facing an approach distance of under 0.05 astronomical units. That is less than 8 million kilometers." For a moment, no one spoke. The number itself was staggering. 8 million kilometers is still vast, 20 times the distance to the moon, but in cosmic terms, it was terrifyingly close. Interstellar objects were supposed to be harmless wanderers, distant and detached. This one, it seemed, had noticed them. The debate shifted. What should be done? Could anything be done? Proposals ranged from sending new observation missions, to preparing satellites, to keeping the matter contained until the data was undeniable. A few voices suggested something more drastic, the beginnings of contingency plans, as though they were discussing the weather, not the possibility of Earth facing an interstellar intruder. But containment was difficult. Scientists talk, data flows, and already, whispers had begun to leak beyond the closed circles of astronomy. A few journalists, those who followed the niche world of sky surveys, had started asking questions. Why are the nightly coordinates being adjusted? Why is 3I Atlas being tracked more aggressively than planned? Answers were evasive, but the pattern was visible to those who looked. Meanwhile, in the observatories, the watchers kept their vigil. Every night, the numbers arrived. Every night, the red line crept inward, fraction by fraction, toward Earth. Some of the younger researchers confessed privately to sleeplessness, their minds caught in loops of calculation and dread. One described it like this: "It feels as though we're being circled, like something in the dark sky is aware of us, and deciding whether to come closer." Of course, officially, no such thing was acknowledged. Officially, this was still a natural phenomenon, an object responding to forces they did not yet fully understand. Yet the unspoken suspicion that there might be more to it than chance clung to every conversation. As the weeks passed, the urgency deepened. Another meeting was called, this time with government representatives quietly in attendance. Their cameras were dark, their names unlisted, but their silence was heavy. They listened as scientists debated models, and though they did not speak, it was clear what they wanted: certainty. Certainty about whether the Earth was in danger. Certainty about how much time they had. But certainty was the one thing the scientists could not provide. The margins of error were wide, the future trajectory still blurred by unknowns. All they could say, with growing unease, was that 3I Atlas was no longer the passive visitor they had expected. It was, undeniably, on a course that brought it nearer. For those listening now, imagine sitting in that room, hearing voices speak in calm, careful tones. while beneath the surface, their words tremble with fear. Imagine watching the red curve slide closer to the planet you call home, knowing that each fraction of a degree might spell safety or disaster. Imagine the weight of silence when no one can promise that everything will be fine. That was where the world's brightest minds found themselves, staring into the dark, watching as a stranger from the stars changed its path, and wondering what that meant for the fragile blue world beneath their feet. The first whispers began on obscure astronomy forums, tucked into long threads of orbital calculations and telescope images. Amateur skywatchers, patient and meticulous, noticed that the official coordinates of 3i Atlas were subtly shifting. At first, they assumed clerical error, but when the same shifts appeared, night after night, speculation bloomed. It's moving inward, one poster wrote. I've run the numbers 3 times. This thing is not following the path it should. The thread gained traction. Curious minds from across the world joined in, some with backyard telescopes, others with access to university databases. Together, they pieced fragments of truth from the shadows of official silence. And as often happens in the digital age, the conversation spilled beyond the small corners of the internet. Soon, bloggers were writing about it. A few small news outlets picked up the story, dressing speculation in cautious words, possible trajectory adjustment, unconfirmed reports of deviation. Governments, of course, noticed. Behind closed doors, quiet directives were issued. Downplay, dismiss, delay. To some extent, it worked. Major media remained silent, unwilling to run with a story that lacked official confirmation. But the vacuum of certainty only deepened curiosity, and in the silence, imagination flourished. On social media, theories multiplied like sparks in dry grass. Some insisted the deviation was nothing more than outgassing jets of material escaping the object's surface, nudging it ever so slightly. Others argued that the curve of its path suggested guidance, as if unseen hands were steering it closer. What if it's not a rock at all? One viral post asked. What if it's something else? The question spread, repeated again and again. What if the phrase had a hypnotic quality? What if this was contact, not accident? What if Earth was being noticed for the first time by something beyond comprehension? The scientific community tried to calm the storm. Papers were rushed into preprint servers, offering natural explanations. Outgassing, solar radiation pressure, interactions with the solar wind, these were all plausible mechanisms. But to the general public, the language was opaque, the conclusions unconvincing. After all, why would natural processes bring an interstellar object closer to Earth? And why did the scientists seem so cautious, so hesitant, as though there were more they were not saying? At night, the debate seeped into living rooms, whispered over cups of tea, glowing on phone screens beside beds. Ordinary people, far from observatories and data centers, stared at images of the dark sky and wondered what was out there, moving silently toward them. For those tasked with watching, the unease only grew. Reports filtered in of strange anomalies, brief fluctuations in radio frequencies, faint and fleeting, always near the object's position. Officially, these were dismissed as noise. Unofficially, the possibility was whispered. Was 3i Atlas sending something? The thought was intoxicating and terrifying. If true, it meant the object was not only moving toward them, but reaching out. If false, it meant their imaginations had outrun their reason. Yet the doubt lingered, gnawing at the edges of rational thought. Governments tightened their grip. Data releases slowed. Observatories were reminded of their obligations, their funding, their silence. But suppression, paradoxically, fueled suspicion. For every question left unanswered, a dozen speculations arose. Some painted 3i Atlas as a harbinger of doom, a cosmic stone cast toward Earth. Others saw it as a messenger, carrying secrets from beyond the stars. The scientists themselves were divided. In private, some confessed to sleepless nights, their minds haunted by the red curve on their charts. Others clung fiercely to the discipline of numbers, refusing to yield to fear. But all shared the same burden, uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, panic grew. Not loudly, but quietly, like water seeping into the cracks of stone. For you listening now, picture the world at that moment. On the surface, life went on, as always. Streets bustled, children played, the rhythms of daily life continued. But beneath, in the hum of servers, in the glow of late-night screens, in the quiet exchanges between scientists and officials, a question lingered, unspoken, yet pervasive. What is coming, toward us? Imagine lying in bed, the sky above you, vast and silent, knowing that somewhere out there, a stranger drifts closer, its path bending toward your world. Imagine that no one can tell you why, or what it means, or how it will end. That was the atmosphere of those weeks, a tension hidden beneath ordinary life, a sense of being watched by the cosmos itself. And while the official word was calm, reassuring, the truth beneath was far more fragile. For in the stillness of the night, when the stars shone cold and clear, one object among them was not content to wander, it was coming nearer. The news did not break all at once. It began quietly, a trickle of articles on small science websites and niche blogs, each one quoting anonymous astronomers or citing leaked observational data. Trajectory adjustment suspected in 3I Atlas. Read one headline, cautious but suggestive. Most readers skimmed past it, filing the story away with other oddities from the cosmos. But the story did not fade. Instead, like an ember caught by the wind, it grew. Soon, larger outlets began to notice. A well-known European newspaper ran a front-page article, citing sources inside the European Space Agency who described genuine concern over the object's path. On television, anchors delivered the news with carefully chosen words, their smiles tight, their eyes betraying unease. The object was still millions of kilometers away. They reassured viewers there was no danger yet. The word yet lingered. Every broadcast, every headline, every expert panel discussion seemed to circle back to the same unavoidable truth. 3I Atlas was behaving in ways no interstellar object ever had before. The public was told it was likely natural, perhaps the result of outgassing or unknown physical forces, but the tone of the reports carried an undercurrent of doubt, and the more they tried to reassure, the more the world began to wonder. Morning newspapers in London, New York, and Tokyo carried diagrams of the object's course, the delicate lines curving across black backgrounds. Side by side, the old trajectory and the new one looked like a pair of threads, one straight, the other bending ever so slightly toward Earth. The difference was small, but even the untrained eye could see it, and imagination did the rest. Talk shows invited astronomers to speak. Some spoke calmly, emphasizing the immense distances still separating Earth from the visitor. Others allowed their nerves to show. One scientist, after a particularly tense segment, leaned into his microphone just before the cameras cut away and muttered, "We don't know why it's happening." The clip spread across social media within hours, stripped of context, replayed millions of times. As the story gained momentum, the tone of coverage shifted. No longer content with quiet caution, some outlets embraced drama. "Stranger from the stars, alters course toward Earth," proclaimed one bold headline. Another blared, "Is 3I Atlas aimed at us?" Theories multiplied. Was it a comet disguised by dust, or a fragment of something larger? Was it a threat, or an unprecedented opportunity? Everywhere images of the object appeared, grainy telescope captures, artist renderings, computer simulations. The most popular were the speculative illustrations, jagged, alien shapes streaking through the dark, glowing faintly against the black sea of space. These images appeared on magazine covers, in news segments, even projected onto billboards in city squares. People who had never cared for astronomy before now recognized the name, 3I Atlas. In living rooms, in cafes, in office corridors, the question spread. Why was it coming closer? Governments responded with statements that were as careful as they were vague. Officials urged calm, repeating that the object posed no immediate threat, that scientists were studying the anomaly, that more data was needed. But the absence of certainty was as loud as any alarm. Viewers could sense the hesitation in their leaders' words, the careful avoidance of the phrase, "no danger at all." The story moved beyond science. Editorials appeared, drawing philosophical comparisons. Some wrote of destiny, of humanity's smallness in the face of the cosmos. Others compared it to ancient omens, a modern-day comet portending change. A few voices went further, framing the object as a test, perhaps even a message. And so, what began as whispers in forums had, within weeks, become the central story of the world. In cafes in Buenos Aires, strangers leaned across tables to debate what it meant. In classrooms in Nairobi, teachers projected images of the trajectory for curious students. In the markets of Istanbul, radio commentators spoke with urgency, their voices carrying into the crowded streets. Through it all, the tone of the world seemed to shift. Ordinary routines continued, but beneath them ran a current of unease. Headlines stacked one after another, each slightly more dramatic than the last. On screens, large and small, the curve of 3I Atlas's path was drawn and redrawn. The red line, inching closer, night after night. It was not panic, not yet, but it was something quieter, subtler, a kind of collective holding of breath. Humanity, for the first time in living memory, felt the presence of an interstellar stranger, not as a distant curiosity, but as something approaching, something whose shadow stretched across their thoughts. And though no one could say why, everyone could feel it. The world had changed. If the news outlets had lit the first sparks, it was the people who fanned the flames. Social media became a living archive of fear, fascination, and imagination. Every hour, new threads appeared, dissecting the latest diagrams, speculating about motives, inventing explanations where none were available. The object was no longer just a scientific anomaly, it was a character in the collective imagination of humanity. Some treated the matter with humor, as people often do when faced with uncertainty. Memes spread quickly, cartoons of Earth holding an umbrella against a cosmic rock, animations of aliens waving as they steered their craft. Jokes were shared, laughter provided a brief shield against the unknown. Yet beneath the humor lay something more fragile, an unspoken awareness that the joke itself was born from nervousness. Others were not so light-hearted. Conspiracy theorists seized the story, weaving it into larger narratives of hidden truths and secret plans. To them, the government's cautious statements were not reassurance, but evidence of cover-ups. They know more than they're telling us. One viral video declared, its creator speaking in hushed tones as though delivering forbidden knowledge. Millions watched, shared, and commented, adding their own suspicions to the growing storm. Among the fearful, one theme rose again and again: intent. Natural objects do not change course so precisely, they argued. If 3i Atlas was shifting inward, it must be doing so for a reason. Some imagined invasion, others a test, others still a cosmic accident that had caught Earth in its path. The lack of answers made every theory plausible, every possibility worth entertaining. Religious groups, too, found meaning in the object's approach. In churches, temples, and mosques, sermons spoke of signs and wonders, of ancient prophecies and divine messages. Some saw 3i Atlas as a harbinger of judgment, others as a messenger of hope. In one crowded cathedral, candles flickered as a priest whispered to his congregation, "Perhaps we are not alone, and perhaps this is how the heavens choose to remind us." Philosophers and poets added their voices, writing essays that pondered humanity's place in the universe. They drew parallels to ancient civilizations watching comets cross their skies, trembling with awe and fear. "We are no different now," one essay concluded, "only our telescopes are larger, and our dread more precise." For ordinary people, the reactions varied. In some homes, families stayed up late, watching the night sky, pointing at a faint speck and telling themselves that was the visitor. In others, parents hushed the subject, not wanting to frighten their children. Conversations around dinner tables grew quieter, punctuated by glances at the evening news. Markets responded. Sales of telescopes surged, as did purchases of survival gear in certain regions. Bookstores reported increased demand for science fiction novels, as though readers sought comfort in imagining futures stranger than the present. Streaming platforms noted a spike in old documentaries about space, comets, and cosmic threats. The object was not only in the sky, it entered the bloodstream of culture. And yet, despite all the noise, one thing was clear: no one truly knew. For all the data, the analysis, the speculation, the object remained silent. It did not answer questions, it did not explain itself. It simply drifted closer, slow and steady, while humanity filled the silence with its own voices. Imagine it, millions of people around the world, each night turning their gaze upward, united in their wonder and unease. Farmers in rural fields, city dwellers beneath glowing skylines, children at windows. Scientists at telescope Sol, staring at the same black canvas, searching for the faint speck of light that carried so much weight. In that shared silence, a strange kind of intimacy was born. For once, the divisions of nations, languages, and ideologies seemed to blur. The world had been given a common story, a mystery larger than itself. Some saw doom, some saw destiny, but all saw together. It is in such moments, quiet and profound, that the heart of humanity reveals itself not only in fear, but in the need to wonder, to tell stories, to give meaning to what cannot yet be explained. And as the red curve of the trajectory inched closer on the charts, those stories multiplied, echoing across screens and voices, binding the world in anticipation of what would come next. While the public wrestled with speculation and imagination, governments were engaged in a different kind of struggle. Behind closed doors, in secure chambers where the air itself seemed heavy, men and women pored over data, whispered into teleconferences, and drafted statements designed to reassure without revealing too much. In Washington, late-night lights burned in the offices of space agencies and defense departments. Advisors shuffled between rooms, carrying folders thick with calculations. The words "possible trajectory adjustment" appeared on countless screens, highlighted in yellow, underlined in red. What could not be said aloud in public was spoken here, in cautious tones. If the object continued along its new path, Earth might not simply witness its passage, it might feel its presence in far more tangible ways. Similar scenes unfolded elsewhere. In Moscow, a round table gleamed beneath cold fluorescent lights as scientists explained orbital mechanics to generals whose faces betrayed little. In Beijing, officials leaned forward, nodding gravely as experts traced arcs across digital skies. In Paris, in Tokyo, in Canberra, variations of the same scene, repeated science and politics colliding, urgency pressing down like invisible weight. And above it all, the United Nations convened. The Security Council met in special session, their discussions cloaked in the language of diplomacy. They debated whether to share certain projections with the world, weighing the benefits of transparency against the risks of panic. One delegate argued for openness, reminding the room that humanity cannot prepare for what it does not understand. Another cautioned restraint. Too much information, too soon, and fear will spiral out of control. The truth was that no one knew the precise nature of the threat. The data showed deviation, yes, but not the reason for it. Was it natural, some previously unseen interaction with solar winds, gravitational nudges, or outgassing jets like a comet's, or was it intentional, the mark of guidance, of decision? Between those two possibilities lay a chasm of consequence. In private, militaries began reviewing contingency plans. What would happen if contact became inevitable? Could interception be possible? Could redirection be attempted? Committees scribbled through old reports, brushing dust off scenarios once considered improbable. They calculated energies, tested models, debated whether any known technology could alter the course of an object so massive, so alien. The conversations were not only scientific, they were also political, laced with mistrust and rivalry. Nations that were allies in name suspected one another of withholding data. Intelligence agencies listened carefully, searching for signs that another country might know more than it admitted. Cooperation was preached in public forums, but behind the curtains, suspicion remained a shadow at every table. And yet, even in this climate, sparks of collaboration emerged. Astronomers from rival nations exchanged notes, quietly bypassing bureaucracy in the name of truth. Engineers discussed the feasibility of joint missions, daring to imagine rockets launched in haste, fleets of probes chasing the intruder. It was fragile, tentative, but it was there the recognition that if the object truly posed danger, humanity would have no choice but to face it together. Press releases told a softer story. Words, carefully chosen, spoke of continued observation and ongoing study. Officials urged the public not to jump to conclusions. Behind those phrases, however, real urgency pulsed. The decision to understate was not born of indifference, but of necessity. Panic was an enemy as real as any falling object, and governments knew that once unleashed, it could not easily be contained. Imagine then the scene in those rooms, thick curtains drawn, projectors humming, maps of the solar system glowing against dark walls. Men and women hunched forward, fingers steepled, voices low but urgent. Numbers filled the air, long strings of decimals charting possibilities. Some scenarios ended with harmless flybys, others with impacts in oceans, or worse, in cities. Each outcome was given probability, each probability debated into the night. At times, silence would fall, heavy and suffocating, as all eyes fixed on a single line of data. In that silence lay a truth unspoken. For all their power, all their machines, humanity was still small, fragile, and vulnerable beneath the vastness of the cosmos. And yet, the work continued, because to do nothing was impossible. Reports were filed, briefings delivered, strategies drafted. Across nations and languages, a chorus of determination rose. If the object had chosen its path toward Earth, humanity would not meet it in ignorance. For now, the official word to the world remained steady: observation, analysis, vigilance. But beneath those words, the gears of preparation were turning, slowly, cautiously, but undeniably. The visitor had altered its course, and in doing so, it had altered the rhythm of human life. The question no longer was whether Earth was being watched, it was how Earth would choose to watch back. It began, as so many discoveries do, with something small, something almost imperceptible, so faint it might have been dismissed as background noise. In the early hours of a quiet night, when most of the world slept, a telescope in Chile registered a flicker in its readings. It was nothing unusual at first glance. Instruments often produced anomalies. Cosmic rays, passing satellites, even subtle shifts in temperature could bend a graph line in unexpected ways. The astronomer on duty made a note, filed the data, and carried on. But then, hours later, another observatory, this one in Hawaii, detected the same faint flicker. Not identical, but close enough to stir unease. The signal was not random static, nor did it behave like a natural burst of energy from a distant star. It repeated. It carried rhythm. By the time dawn spread across Europe, 3 more telescopes had noticed it too. Each team assumed, privately, that they had misread their data. Yet, when they compared notes in quiet emails and hushed phone calls, a chill began to creep through their conversations. Because what they were seeing did not look like noise at all. It looked like intention. The source was traced, again and again, and each time the conclusion was the same. 3I ATLAS. The interstellar visitor that had already unsettled the world with its change of course was now pulsing with light in ways that could not be easily explained. At first, the fluctuations resembled a heartbeat, slow, steady, measured. But then, as instruments tuned more finely, scientists began to notice patterns hidden within the rhythm. Variations of intensity, small pauses, tiny shifts in frequency, all too regular to be dismissed as chance. One astronomer described it, in a confidential report, as a code hidden in starlight. News of the discovery spread, not through official announcements but through whispers, through encrypted messages passed between researchers who did not yet know what they were witnessing. Some begged for caution, insisting that to declare such findings without certainty would invite chaos. Others argued that secrecy itself was a greater danger. And all the while, the object continued to pulse. Its light, faint but deliberate, blinked across the blackness of space as though it were trying to be heard. In meeting rooms across continents, scientists gathered around screens filled with jagged lines and glowing graphs. They leaned in close, tracing the patterns with fingers, their voices low and careful. Could this be an artifact of the instruments, a trick of atmosphere, a quirk of cosmic physics not yet understood? Or was it, as some dared whisper, a message? To speak those words aloud felt like trespassing into forbidden territory. The idea of communication from beyond had long been the subject of speculation, of science fiction and hopeful experiments like SETI, but never before had something so solid, so measurable, appeared so close. Yet the implications were almost unbearable to contemplate. If it truly was a signal, then 3IATLAS was not merely a rock or an icy shard drifting through the void. It was something else, something alive with purpose. In the observatories, the mood was conflicted. Excitement and dread swirled together, each as strong as the other. Some scientists felt an almost childlike wonder, the thrill of standing on the brink of discovery beyond imagination. Others felt a weight pressing on their chests, the fear that humanity might not be ready to understand what was reaching out to them. Emails were exchanged at a frantic pace. Attachments filled with waveforms and spectral analysis flew from server to server, marked with urgent labels for internal review only. Do not share preliminary findings. But of course, information like this cannot be contained for long. The more people who saw it, the more people who talked. And the more they talked, the harder it became to keep the whispers from spilling outward. In the stillness of night, researchers sat alone in their offices. Headphones pressed tight, listening to the signal translated into sound. It came across as a faint, pulsing hum, rising and falling with strange precision. Some swore they could hear a pattern, almost like music. Others said it made their skin prickle, as if the sound carried something more than vibration, something almost emotional. One astronomer later described it as the loneliest song ever heard. Another compared it to a lighthouse, its beams sweeping across a dark and endless ocean. But no matter how poetic the descriptions, the fact remained: 3i Atlas was not silent. It was speaking, or at least, it seemed to be, and humanity was listening. This discovery, fragile and tentative as it was, marked a turning point. For scientists, it was both a dream and a nightmare. The data was undeniable, yet the meaning was unfathomable. And so they kept working, their screens glowing into the small hours, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they were perhaps the first humans to glimpse a truth bigger than themselves. They did not yet know if the world would believe them. They did not even know if they fully believed it themselves. But one thing was certain: nothing about 3i Atlas could ever again be seen as simple chance. It was watching, it was moving, and now, it was speaking. And somewhere, far above the turning Earth, the object continued its patient pulse, like a distant hand tapping against the glass of the universe. The secret was never meant to leave the laboratories, but secrets, especially the fragile kind carried by too many hands, rarely stay hidden for long. Within days, the first whispers escaped the circles of astronomers and slipped into the wider world. An anonymous post on a forum claimed that an interstellar visitor is transmitting signals. Screenshots of supposed data began to circulate, grainy graphs that few could properly read but that many interpreted with certainty. From there, the story spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up cautiously at first, their headlines wrapped in question marks. Strange pulses detected from mysterious object. Scientists divided over unexplained light patterns. But soon, as clicks multiplied and interest surged, the question marks vanished. The language grew sharper, bolder. Signal from space confirmed. 3IATLAS is trying to communicate. On social media, the reaction was instant and overwhelming. Feeds filled with speculation, jokes, and fear in equal measure. Memes portrayed the object as a giant eye staring at Earth, or as a messenger carrying ancient secrets. Some users declared it the greatest discovery of all time. Others swore it was a sign of impending doom. And some dismissed it all as fabrication, another in a long line of conspiracies designed to distract. But beneath the noise, a deeper unease settled. It was one thing for scientists to argue quietly about orbital mechanics. It was another for ordinary people, sitting at kitchen tables or lying awake in bed, to imagine a vast object deliberately speaking across the void. Parents found themselves fielding questions from their children. What if it's real? What if they're coming? Teachers overheard whispered debates in classrooms. Priests and pastors gave sermons that threaded the mystery into age-old stories of judgment and salvation. For governments, the leak was a nightmare. Statements were drafted to calm the public, to emphasize that no definitive proof existed, that signals often had mundane explanations. But the words landed like feathers against stone. The story had already taken root, and no amount of reassurance could stop its growth. Conspiracy theorists seized the moment with vigor. Some insisted the object was an alien craft, its signals a countdown to invasion. Others believed it was a beacon, calling humanity to join a greater cosmic community. Still others claimed that the signals were not new at all, but had been known for years and hidden by shadowy elites. The theories contradicted one another, but together they created a haze through which truth struggled to shine. And in that haze, fear flourished. Stock markets wobbled. Survivalist communities stocked their bunkers with supplies. Groups formed online with names like the Watchers of Atlas and the Final Signal. They traded rumors, debated timelines, and sometimes fell silent when the weight of possibility pressed too hard upon their imaginations. Yet there was wonder, too. Amateur astronomers pointed their telescopes toward the night sky, hoping to glimpse the faint glimmer of the visitor. Musicians began composing songs inspired by the pulse, layering beats to mimic its rhythm. Artists painted great canvases of light and shadow, imagining what intelligence might lie behind the signals. For every voice that trembled in fear, another rose in awe. Still, the undercurrent of anxiety grew stronger with each passing day, because as the public tried to make sense of the mystery, the scientists who had first heard the pulse knew something the world at large did not. The signal was continuing. It had not been a brief anomaly, a momentary quirk. It was ongoing, steady, relentless. Night after night, the pulse repeated, each cycle a reminder that something or someone was out there, insistent on being noticed. And people noticed. They listened. They argued and speculated. They dreamed and feared. And slowly, across nations and cultures, a collective realization began to take shape. Humanity was no longer merely looking out into a silent universe. The silence had been broken. What it meant, no one could yet say, but the knowledge that a signal existed, that somewhere in the darkness, a pattern of light was echoing, changed the way people walked through their days. Coffee shop conversations lingered on the subject. News anchors mentioned it between reports of politics and weather. Couples lay awake, whispering about what the future might hold. It was as if the whole world had tilted slightly, a subtle shift in gravity that left everyone feeling both unsteady and alert. And though officials begged for patience, though scientists cautioned restraint, one truth had already taken root in the human heart. The visitor was no longer silent. And silence, once broken, cannot easily be restored. Pressure builds like water behind a dam. For weeks, officials had managed to hold the line, insisting on caution, urging the public not to jump to conclusions. But the leak had grown into a flood, and the flood was now too strong to contain. The world demanded answers, and answers could no longer be delayed. A press conference was scheduled, hastily arranged, yet broadcast globally. Cameras flickered to life in crowded halls. Reporters sat with pens poised, their questions sharp and urgent. At the podium, representatives from space agencies stood side by side, their faces carefully neutral. They spoke slowly, their words measured. Yes, they said, patterns of light have been observed. No, we cannot confirm their origin. Natural processes remain the most likely explanation, but in the eyes of the audience watching on screens at home, in cafes, in classrooms, the words rang hollow, too cautious, too practiced. For many, it seemed less like explanation and more like evasion. The very act of denial only fueled suspicion. If the signals were meaningless, why not simply say so? If they were harmless, why did the officials look so tense? Meanwhile, in closed-door meetings, the tone was far less restrained. Scientists clashed, voices rising, as arguments unfolded across tables littered with printouts and glowing laptops. Some insisted the pulses were nothing more than cometary outgassing reflecting sunlight in regular patterns. Others pointed to statistical analyses that showed too much order, too much precision to be dismissed. Nature does not count in prime numbers, one physicist muttered, holding up a chart that suggested just that. The disagreement spilled into public forums. Renowned researchers contradicted one another on live television. One declared the phenomenon to be almost certainly natural. Another countered, saying, if this is natural, then our understanding of physics is missing something profound. Their debates drew millions of viewers. But instead of clarity, they produced confusion. Governments, too, struggled to find a common stance. In some nations, officials leaned toward transparency, sharing raw data online in hopes of calming speculation. In others, secrecy tightened, with information labeled classified, access restricted to only the highest levels. Allies quarreled behind closed doors, each fearing that another might know more than it admitted. What began as a scientific question now threatened to become a geopolitical fault line. And yet, despite the noise, one truth began to settle in the hearts of ordinary people. The visitor was behaving in ways no ordinary rock should. Whether it was a natural marvel or something stranger, it was unlike anything humanity had seen before. And that difference, so vast, so undeniable, was enough to stir both awe and dread. The world entered a strange rhythm. Each night, observatories tuned their instruments toward the pulsing light. Each morning, new data trickled into databases, passed through algorithms, scrutinized by weary eyes. Each afternoon, the findings slipped into news feeds and television programs, sparking new waves of debate. It was as if the entire planet had become a single organism, its collective heartbeat aligned with that distant pulse. But with alignment came anxiety. Rumors of mass protests surfaced, people demanding the truth from leaders. In one city, thousands gathered in a central square, holding signs painted with stars and questions. What does it want? Why won't you tell us? In another, panic buying swept through supermarkets, shelves stripped bare by whispers of the end. For those in power, the balance was delicate, and it grew more fragile with each passing day. To say too much risked sparking chaos. To say too little risked losing trust altogether. And behind all the debates, behind the official statements and press releases, lay a deeper fear that none wished to speak aloud. What if the signals were not just random pulses of light? What if they were the opening words of a conversation humanity had no choice but to answer? In the quiet of night, ordinary people gazed upward, wondering if the faint light glimmering near Mars was looking back at them. And in laboratories and command centers, the same thought haunted those who studied the data most closely. The visitor was no longer simply changing course, it was changing the world itself. And so, humanity found itself suspended, caught between disbelief and acceptance, between fear and wonder. The object pulsed on, silent yet insistent, while the earth below whispered, argued, shouted, and prayed. The great question, what it meant, and what would come next, hung over every conversation, heavy as the stars. The dam had cracked. The waters of truth and speculation mingled, rushing forward with unstoppable force. And in that torrent, the world drifted together into a future more uncertain and more united than it had ever known. The nights seemed quieter after the first whisper of a signal had been detected. At first, it had been a faint hum, barely distinguishable from the static noise that fills every deep space receiver. Scientists thought it might be interference from the sun's charged winds, or perhaps the trembling heartbeat of distant pulsars that often confuse even the most sensitive instruments. Yet, as the weeks slipped by, the hum sharpened, began to show rhythm, subtle at first, like the tentative notes of an instrument tuning itself. And then, almost imperceptibly, that rhythm grew steady. It was no longer random. It was no longer noise. Something was pulsing out there, across the abyss, and it seemed to be directed, precise, intentional. The object they called 3I Atlas had been mysterious enough in its silence, but now it appeared to be speaking, or at least, sending something that resembled speech. Imagine yourself lying back, eyes heavy, listening to the soft echo of a heartbeat that does not belong to Earth, a vibration that rises and falls, steady and deliberate, as if someone or something were tapping gently at the glass wall that separates our world from the endless dark. This was how the researchers described it in their reports. The signal was not loud, it was not even dramatic. Instead, it carried with it an intimacy, as if whatever intelligence lay behind it had chosen to whisper rather than to shout. To whisper across billions of kilometers of empty space. And the destination of that whisper, unmistakably, was us. At observatories across the planet, data poured in. The long strings of binary digits, ones and zeros, began to repeat in ways that defied natural explanation. Natural radio bursts scatter like fireworks, uneven and chaotic. But this signal returned again and again with mathematical precision, a pattern that could not have been shaped by mere cosmic chance. Some saw in it a message waiting to be deciphered. Others saw danger, the slow unfolding of a hand reaching across the stars, one whose intent remained veiled. The first real debate erupted behind closed doors. Should humanity respond? Should we acknowledge the signal? For some, it was a moment of wonder, the realization of a dream carried by countless generations, the dream of not being alone. For others, it was an existential risk. To answer was to announce ourselves to a power that might not share our kindness, our fragility, or our desire for peace. The scientific world, usually methodical and patient, found itself trembling at the edge of panic. This was not a discovery to be catalogued and filed away. This was a knock at the door. As the pulse of the signal grew clearer, one more truth became difficult to ignore. The transmission was not broad, not a sweeping beam scattered across the cosmos. It was narrow, concentrated, focused, like a searchlight. And its aim was Earth. There were nights when astronomers would sit in silence, headphones pressed tight, listening to the faint mechanical rhythm from beyond. Some described it as mechanical, others as almost musical. The intervals between bursts followed strange sequences, not quite random, not quite regular. A code perhaps, a message folded into the silence of interstellar space. Public awareness trickled in slowly at first. A few leaks from observatories, a handful of cryptic reports in scientific journals. Then the story broke, and it was everywhere. Television, newspapers, endless streams of commentary online. A signal from an interstellar object, a signal that grew stronger as the object adjusted its path closer to Earth. For many, it was exhilarating. For others, terrifying. Across living rooms and lecture halls, people asked the same question: why now? Why us? In the dim glow of evening, it was easy to imagine yourself as part of the listening world. a participant in the collective stillness of humanity as we strain to understand. It is a strange thing, isn't it, to realize that the universe might be speaking back. For so long, we have been sending our messages outward, the crackling broadcasts of early radio, the gold records carried by Voyager, the carefully crafted greetings meant to announce who we are. Yet now, perhaps for the first time, there was the hint of an answer. And it did not come from some distant star system chosen at random. It came from a traveler already within our celestial neighborhood, a body whose trajectory had bent itself into a path that intersected our own. Governments scrambled. In quiet halls lit by cold fluorescent lamps, officials gathered with scientists and defense advisors. Each wanted to claim control over the narrative, to decide whether silence or reply was the safest course. Some argued that ignoring the signal might anger whatever intelligence had sent it. Others said to respond would expose us further, turning our pale blue dot into a beacon for dangers we could not foresee. In that tension, humanity revealed its deepest fear, not the unknown itself, but the realization that we could no longer pretend the universe was indifferent to us. As you listen now, let yourself imagine the sound. A soft, steady beat, rising and falling, too precise to dismiss, too delicate to terrify. There is an elegance to it, as though whoever composed it knew we would be listening at night. Half awake, drifting between wakefulness and dreams. Perhaps they understood the fragility of our minds, the way we cling to patterns, the way we find comfort in rhythm. Or perhaps it is our imagination that casts kindness where there may be none. Still, the signal endures, hour after hour, day after day, pulsing like a lighthouse in the sea of stars. For scientists, the signal became an obsession. They traced its modulation, mapped its frequencies, compared it against every natural source they could imagine. None matched. It was not the roar of a quasar, not the stutter of pulsars, not the hiss of intergalactic gas. It was unique, belonging only to this object. This interstellar traveler we named 3IATLAS, and the conclusion, though whispered at first, became undeniable. This was intentional. This was a choice. Somewhere, within that object, or perhaps carried by it, was a transmitter aimed directly at Earth. Still, the meaning remained hidden. Numbers repeated themselves, but did not unfold into a clear code. Geometric patterns emerged, but dissolved into ambiguity before anyone could declare certainty. Some insisted the message was simple, a call of recognition, a statement that we are not alone. Others saw warning. A countdown, perhaps, hidden in the rhythm. The debates stretched long into sleepless nights, as experts around the globe leaned into their screens, searching for the one thread that might unravel the enigma. And all the while, 3IATLAS crept closer. Its change, of course, once subtle, now undeniable, carried it steadily along a line that intersected Earth's orbital path. The twin mysteries, its trajectory, and its signals seemed woven together, a dance of movement and message. Was the signal a reassurance, an attempt to prepare us? Or was it simply an announcement, the drumbeat of inevitability? Humanity watched, listened, and waited, caught between awe and dread. Close your eyes now, if you wish, and picture it. That lonely traveler, black against the starlight, pulsing its quiet rhythm into the void. Each note a reminder that the universe is larger, stranger, more alive than we ever dared imagine. Each beat a question left unanswered, and as Earth spun beneath the signal's invisible beam, a quiet truth settled in. Whatever the intent, we had been noticed, and once noticed, we could never again return to anonymity in the cosmic night. The weeks that followed were heavy with unease, though life on the surface of the Earth seemed to carry on as usual. Children walked to school, markets bustled, trains ran their steady courses. Yet beneath the routine hum of daily life, something shifted. People looked up more often at night, their eyes drawn to the pinpricked sky, searching for a star that might be more than a star. The object itself was not visible without a telescope, but the knowledge of its presence had already planted itself into the collective imagination of humanity. Every newspaper headline, every panel discussion, every urgent conference turned around the same haunting detail. The signal was no longer just a pulse. It was evolving. Subtle variations appeared in the intervals. Pauses stretched and contracted, as though the invisible hand behind the transmission had changed its tempo, had chosen to rewrite the music. At the SETI Institute, a group of exhausted researchers huddled around glowing screens, tracing the fluctuations in the latest data. The lead scientist, a woman who had dedicated her life to listening for a cosmic hello, whispered to her colleagues that she felt as though someone, somewhere, had finally said her name. She admitted, in private, that she sometimes dreamt of the rhythm, now that it followed her into sleep, looping endlessly, a lullaby written by a voice she had never seen. Her confession unsettled the room, because others nodded quietly in agreement. The sense of intimacy grew stronger as the signal's precision sharpened. It began to drift across multiple frequencies, like chords layered in harmony, resonating with an almost musical quality. The airwaves seemed alive with something more deliberate, more structured than chance. Patterns resembling prime numbers emerged in the sequence. Spirals and geometric shapes unfolded when the waves were mapped onto visual graphs. It was as if mathematics itself had become a language woven into sound. Some claimed this was proof of intelligence. Others dismissed it as wishful interpretation, the brain's desperate attempt to make meaning where there might be none. But no matter the argument, one fact remained. Nothing like it had ever been recorded before. The international scientific community fractured under the weight of the mystery. In one corner were those who advocated openness. The signal should be shared widely, decoded collaboratively, a human effort to meet a cosmic riddle with solidarity. In another corner were those who urged secrecy. The signal might reveal knowledge too dangerous to handle. It could contain instructions, or traps, or the lure of a predator cloaked in the disguise of mathematics. Caught between these extremes, many remained silent, unsure which path would lead to safety. Meanwhile, beyond the halls of science, the world responded in ways that reflected both wonder and fear. In crowded city apartments, families stayed up late, listening to simulated recreations of the signal, soft tones that echoed like a heartbeat across the air. In temples and churches, congregations gathered to pray, some seeing the signal as a sign from the heavens, others fearing it as the whisper of an unknown power. Artists painted strange visions of black monoliths adrift in starlight. Poets wrote verses about the sound of the universe calling back, and musicians folded the rhythm into their songs. The signal seeped into culture, into dreams, into the very fabric of what it meant to look upward and wonder. Yet, behind this surface fascination, governments grew restless. Intelligence agencies demanded access to raw data, fearing that hidden within the pulse might be knowledge of unimaginable potential or danger. Theories spread quickly in hushed corridors. What if the signal contained coordinates? What if it marked Earth as a destination? What if it was less a message and more a beacon, guiding something else toward us? The tension mounted until one fact broke through and silenced even the wildest speculation. The frequency had shifted again, and now, impossibly, it matched the range used by Earth's own early radio broadcasts. The discovery rattled the scientific world. For decades, humanity had spilled its signals into the cosmos. Old television shows, crackling news bulletins, coded military transmissions, and now, the interstellar visitor appeared to be echoing those frequencies back. Researchers described it as if the object had tuned itself deliberately to our voice, mirroring the very same range we once cast outward. Some interpreted it as mimicry, others as acknowledgement. Perhaps it was answering in the only language it knew, by reflecting our own. As this revelation spread, unease deepened into panic for some. If the object had been listening to us, then it had known of our presence long before we had noticed its own. It had been aware, silent, waiting. The signal was not an introduction. It was a continuation, a reply. That idea gnawed at the minds of scientists, haunting their waking hours. What had it heard? What had it understood of us? And what did it intend to do now that it had revealed itself? At night, in observatories nestled high in the mountains, researchers described a peculiar feeling of being watched. They looked through their instruments and saw nothing but the cold specks of stars. Yet the signal drummed steadily in their ears, a reminder that somewhere out there, something was gazing back. A few began to speak of it in almost reverent terms, calling it the echo visitor, or the mirror of the void. Their words, though poetic, carried a current of unease. Humanity had dreamed of contact for so long, yet now that it seemed to have arrived, the dream trembled at the edge of nightmare. Still, the debates raged on. Should we craft a reply? Some argued yes, that silence might be seen as fear or hostility. Others insisted no, that responding might expose our vulnerabilities further. A secret council of nations met quietly to weigh the choices, their discussions hidden from the public eye. What was said in those meetings remains unknown, but rumors trickled out. Rumors that a message had already been prepared. Rumors that some had chosen to answer, even as others begged for restraint. Through it all, the object crept closer, its trajectory bending with eerie precision. The panic among scientists was no longer simply about the signal, but about the undeniable fact that the signal and the course change seemed intertwined. This was not merely a rock hurtling through the void. This was not merely chance. The closer it came, the clearer the signal grew, as if proximity sharpened its voice. And each beat, each whisper across the stars, seemed to carry the same unspoken message. It is coming. Close your eyes now, if you wish, and picture it. A world listening in silence, waiting for a meaning that refuses to emerge, holding its breath as the sky itself seems to lean closer. Perhaps the message is welcome. Perhaps it is warning. But in the steady rhythm of the signal, the line between comfort and dread blurs, and humanity finds itself drifting in that uncertain space between dream and fear. The signal by now had become almost a companion, a presence humming gently at the edge of every night. Across the world, ordinary people grew accustomed to the idea that somewhere out there, in the cold reaches of space, a voice was pulsing. Some found comfort in it, treating it like a cosmic lullaby. leaving the sound playing quietly in their homes as they drifted to sleep. Others felt haunted by it, their dreams invaded by the steady rhythm, as though the universe itself were knocking at their door. Scientists, however, had no luxury of simple wonder. They were now faced with patterns that went beyond the ordinary. The transmissions had started to vary in length and intensity, forming structures that could no longer be explained by randomness. Imagine looking at a painting where strokes of color seem chaotic at first, but when you step back, a picture begins to form. That was what the signal had become, an incomplete painting, strokes of meaning emerging from the void. In Cambridge, a team of mathematicians noticed that the signal repeated sequences based on prime numbers, the building blocks of mathematics. In Tokyo, researchers mapped the intervals into geometric forms and discovered spirals, cubes, and even what looked like star maps. In Geneva, physicists proposed that the modulation of the frequency itself was encoding data. As if layers of meaning had been carefully woven into the hum, the consensus was slowly growing. Though it was frightening, this was not only communication. It was deliberate, complex, and very possibly advanced beyond our capacity to fully understand. The psychological toll on those decoding the signal was immense. Many of them confessed to hearing phantom echoes even when the receivers were switched off. Some became convinced that the message was personal, directed at them individually. Others withdrew into silence, overwhelmed by the weight of the task. One young scientist was quoted anonymously, saying, "It feels like trying to read the thoughts of the ocean. We catch a wave, a fragment, but we know the depth beneath us is immeasurable." Meanwhile, the object's trajectory continued to shift. At first, its altered path toward Earth had been subtle enough to excuse as gravitational nudges, small interactions with the planets it passed near. But by now, the change was undeniable. The new course was purposeful. The idea that an object, a rock, a fragment of interstellar debris could alter its direction so precisely defied natural laws. This was something else. Either the object was being guided, or it was guiding itself. And in both cases, the conclusion was staggering. The panic among scientists became more difficult to hide from the public. Leaked documents suggested that some agencies believed the signal might be a countdown. Others feared it could be instructions, coordinates, or even a warning. Theories proliferated faster than they could be debunked. Was it an invitation to prepare for contact? A command to respond? Or a demonstration of power, showing us that our skies were no longer beyond the reach of others? Amid this confusion, something even more chilling occurred. A shift in the pattern produced what some linguists swore resembled words, not in any human language, but in the cadence of speech, in the rise and fall that mimicked communication as we know it. They said it carried the intonation of intent, of sentences being spoken. Though no one could translate it, the sensation was unmistakable. We were being addressed. In living rooms around the world, people argued over the meaning of the signal. Some called it the dawn of first contact, a chance for humanity to step into a wider community of civilizations. Others whispered darker interpretations that it was the prelude to conquest, the opening chapter of an encounter we might not survive. And woven through both hope and fear was the knowledge that this was no longer distant speculation. The traveler was on its way, and Earth was in its path. Imagine lying awake at night, the window open to the cool air, and in the silence between your own heartbeats, you imagine hearing another steady, mechanical, far away, but drawing nearer. That is how the scientists described their long nights in the observatories. The sense that they were listening not just to data but to a presence. They admitted to a strange intimacy, as though the universe had singled us out, chosen to notice us in a way it had never done before, and that intimacy carried with it both wonder and dread. Governments, for their part, remained divided. Some prepared protocols for contact, drafting cautious replies in mathematical code, hoping to demonstrate intelligence without arrogance. Others hardened their defenses, treating the object as a potential threat, rehearsing scenarios of impact or invasion. The tension was unbearable, because the truth was that humanity did not know what it was dealing with. The object could carry life. It could carry knowledge, or it could carry danger beyond anything we could imagine. As the days ticked by, something became clear. Silence was no longer an option. The signal was too direct, too persistent, too clearly meant for us. Whether by intention or by necessity, humanity would have to choose. To respond or not. To reach out or to withdraw. Every moment of delay felt like standing at the threshold of history, paralyzed by the weight of choice. And so, while the world turned restlessly under the signal's steady rhythm, the story moved into a new and fragile chapter. Because whether we feared it or welcomed it, whether we denied it or embraced it, one thing was certain: we had been noticed, and the visitor was not turning away. Let your eyes close now, if you wish, and picture that hum still alive in the darkness. Steady and unwavering, the voice of something vast and unknown, drawing ever closer, each pulse a reminder, each note a promise. And as the world listens, holding its breath, the question remains unspoken but unavoidable. What happens when the whisper becomes a knock at our door? The days grew shorter as the seasons changed, but the long shadows cast by autumn skies were not the only thing unsettling the world. Far above, 3i Atlas pressed onward, its path bending ever more clearly toward Earth. For those who could calculate trajectories, there was no longer comfort in ambiguity. This was no accident, no casual drift through our solar system. It was intention, drawn with mathematical certainty across the black canvas of space. The signal had not ceased. If anything, it had grown more insistent, as though the closer the object came, the more urgent its message became. What had once been a steady hum was now layered with variations, like a melody learning to speak. The rhythms, stretched, folded in on themselves, echoed with harmonics that teased the human ear with the illusion of language. Some researchers began to swear they heard something more than data in the sound, a cadence that resembled breath, or a tone that reminded them of voices rising and falling. Others dismissed it as the mind's tendency to sculpt patterns from chaos. But still, the unease remained. The signal was evolving, and it seemed to be evolving with purpose. At first, only a handful of scientists dared to whisper the possibility. But as the evidence mounted, as the patterns became too intricate to ignore, the whispers grew louder. What if 3i Atlas was not merely a fragment of rock or ice, not just another interstellar wanderer? What if it was something constructed, something designed? The phrase slipped into conversations like a stone breaking the surface of still water. What if it was a ship? The idea was almost too vast to hold, and yet it spread quickly. There were papers drafted, leaked, discredited, and then discussed again in late-night meetings where the weight of secrecy pressed heavy on every word. Some suggested it might be a derelict craft, a relic of an ancient civilization adrift between stars. Others feared it was still active, still guided by minds we could not see, moving now with deliberate intent toward Earth. The panic this inspired was not only scientific. In cities across the world, whispers turned into rumors, and rumors into headlines. People argued on crowded streets, in hushed tones on late trains, in the glow of television broadcasts that tried to soothe but only deepened the unease. Was this the first visitor, or the first scout? Was this an arrival, or an invasion? Governments, caught between denial and dread, struggled to hold the line. Some officials insisted it was still a natural phenomenon, an anomaly that science had yet to explain. Others, behind locked doors, ordered the drafting of contingency plans. There were reports of satellites repositioned, telescopes aimed with obsessive precision, defense agencies quietly running simulations of scenarios they had no vocabulary to describe. And all the while, the signal beat on, like a heart that refused to be ignored. At night, in the quiet of bedrooms, ordinary people found themselves haunted by the thought. Close your eyes and imagine it, an object in the dark, vast and cold, yet alive with intent, a traveler older than our species, now gliding silently toward us, each pulse of its signal like the ticking of a clock, counting down not to destruction, but to arrival. What would it mean to see it up close, to face the truth of what it was? Among scientists, the divide grew harsher. One camp argued that the signal was a form of greeting, a mathematical handshake meant to prepare us for contact. Another believed it was a test, a probe of our intelligence, our readiness, perhaps even our weakness. A third insisted it was neither greeting nor test, but warning that the course change and the signal were both signs of a danger we had not yet begun to imagine. No one could say which was true. And so, in quiet conference rooms and echoing lecture halls, the greatest minds of our time found themselves staring into an abyss of possibility. If it was a ship, then who had built it? If it was alive, then what kind of life could endure such distances, such loneliness, to reach us? And if it was a weapon, then what choice did humanity truly have but to watch, and wait, and hope? As the days slipped by, the signal deepened its hold on human imagination. It appeared in dreams, in stories, in whispered conversations beneath starlit skies. Some came to believe it was benevolent, that the visitor brought knowledge, perhaps salvation. Others clung to fear, convinced that our days were numbered, that the approach of 3i Atlas marked the end rather than the beginning. And through it all, the world listened, each heartbeat echoing the rhythm from the stars, each night a reminder that something vast and unknown was drawing ever closer. Whatever it was, whatever its purpose, the moment of revelation crept nearer with every passing hour. Humanity stood at the edge of history, staring into the dark, and the dark, for the first time, seemed to be staring back. The world began to shift in subtle ways as 3i Atlas moved closer. Though most people continued their daily routines, an undercurrent of tension flowed through society, like a low hum beneath the ordinary noise of life. Markets fluctuated, conversations drifted toward speculation, and art itself began to change. Painters, musicians, and writers found themselves drawn to themes of the unknown, of journeys through darkness, of arrivals that promised both wonder and fear. It was as if the presence of this object in the sky, still invisible to most naked eyes, had already begun to shape the collective human psyche. In observatories, the mood was no calmer. Telescopes recorded faint glimmers of reflected sunlight from the object's surface, which seemed at times too smooth, too deliberate, to be natural. In some frames, it shimmered like metal, though distant ice can do the same. Still, the impression remained. It did not look like a rock. It looked like something made. The signal grew stranger as well. What had been pulses of radio waves now carried faint modulations that hinted at structure, a pattern repeating within a larger pattern, as though layers of meaning had been hidden inside. Specialists in linguistics, cryptography, and mathematics all struggled to decode it, but the more they tried, the more it seemed to shift. It was not static. It was changing, along with its approach. One researcher described it in haunting terms. It's as if it is listening to us listening. This suggestion, once spoken, could not be erased. If the signal was adapting, responding, then it was not simply a beacon. It was a dialogue. And if it was a dialogue, then who, or what, was on the other end? Governments across the globe began to tighten their grip on information. Public press releases remained calm, assuring people that astronomers were monitoring the situation carefully, that there was no immediate threat, that this was still a mystery, best met with patience. But behind closed doors, the tone was very different. Classified meetings stretched long into the night, scenarios were mapped in secret, and messages were exchanged in quiet channels between nations that had once been rivals. Whatever 3I Atlas was, no one country could confront it alone. Meanwhile, independent scientists and amateurs, those outside the veil of government secrecy, continued to publish what they observed. Online forums buzzed with theories. Some claimed the object was slowing down, adjusting its course not like a comet caught in gravity's grip, but like a craft under control. Others insisted the variations in the signal matched no natural process, but instead bore the hallmarks of intelligence. And still others, fearful of panic, tried to argue it was all coincidence. Nothing more than the human imagination painting faces on clouds. But the clouds were darkening. Night after night, the signal echoed across observatories like the tolling of a cosmic bell, and more than one observer reported dreams, vivid, unsettling dreams, after long hours of listening. They dreamed of vast corridors lined with lights, of silence so profound it pressed like a weight, of doors that opened into endless voids. Some swore they heard the signal inside their dreams, pulsing like a heartbeat. A few even claimed that when they awoke, they understood fragments of meaning, fleeting impressions of intent, though none could put it fully into words. These accounts were dismissed as stress, as the mind's fragile response to overwhelming mystery. And yet, they spread quietly at first. Then with greater confidence, scientists admitted to one another that they too had dreamed, that they too had felt, even if only for a moment, that the signal was reaching not just their machines, but their minds. What was it trying to say? That question consumed whole days and nights of debate. Theories blossomed like stars, only to collapse under the gravity of doubt. Some said it was a call for peace, an invitation to rise beyond our small planet into the larger community of the cosmos. Others feared it was a lure, a trap disguised as welcome, drawing us closer to an intelligence we could not comprehend. A smaller group, more unnerved than all the rest, suggested it was neither welcome nor trap, but judgment. That the visitor came to weigh us, to measure our worth, and to decide our fate. As the weeks passed, one truth became unavoidable. It was no longer possible to treat 3I Atlas as a curiosity. It was an event, and that event was approaching, step by step, day by day, with no sign of halting. The human heart has always trembled at the unknown. In ancient times, comets were seen as omens, bright streaks across the sky announcing change, upheaval, or catastrophe. Now, in the age of satellites and science, we thought ourselves beyond such fear. And yet here we were again, staring into the heavens, and seeing not just ice and rock, but intention. It became clear that the world was living in two realities at once. In the daylight, people bought groceries, sent children to school, scrolled through their phones. But in the quiet of night, when news anchors whispered updates and headlines grew bolder, another reality seeped in, the reality of something vast and silent, changing course through the void, coming closer with every rotation of the earth. In that quiet, the fear returned. Not only the fear of what it was, but of what it would reveal about us. Were we ready for such a visitor? Were we prepared to answer a question we did not yet understand? And somewhere, far beyond the reach of our comfort, 3I Atlas drifted onward, indifferent to our hopes, to our dread, to our fragile lives below. Its signals sang through the darkness, weaving itself into the fabric of human thought, patient and relentless. The stars had always seemed silent, but now one of them spoke, and we could not help but listen. Night fell across observatories scattered on mountain peaks, deserts, and islands, and yet the hum of machines and the quiet voices of watchers never ceased. They leaned over consoles, eyes tired but unblinking, waiting for the next line of data to flow, the next whisper from the darkness. And when it came, it always carried with it the same haunting truth. 3I Atlas was still coming. Its path was no longer uncertain. Models that once showed it sweeping wide past the orbit of Earth now tightened like a noose. recalibrated again and again with new measurements. Each recalculation drew the trajectory closer, until denial could no longer shield the mind. It was coming toward us. The realization rippled outward, like the spreading rings of water after a stone has fallen. Scientists debated in hushed tones, their words carefully chosen, their voices low. Reporters began to sense the shift, publishing cautious headlines that spoke of new calculations, possible adjustments, unexpected gravitational influences, and the public, though they could not name the change, felt it in their bones. Something was wrong. In classrooms, children asked questions their teachers struggled to answer. In late-night conversations, families whispered about escape, about shelters, about what the world would do if the object came too close. The words course toward Earth had not yet been spoken openly by leaders, but in silence, in instinct, people already knew. The object itself remained a mystery. Telescopes resolved it only as a faint blur, a shape neither comet nor asteroid, neither random nor familiar. Its light flickered oddly, as though it rotated with purpose. Not merely the slow tumble of rock, but a rhythm, a cycle, deliberate and constant. And always there was the signal, the steady beat that seemed less like a broadcast and more like a presence. Some compared it to a lighthouse sweeping across dark seas, warning and guiding all at once. Others likened it to a heartbeat, the pulse of something alive. In one observatory, a young technician swore she heard words hidden in the rhythm. Fragments of language she did not know but felt she understood. She did not dare speak it aloud to her superiors. But in her private journal, she wrote, "It feels like a message saying, 'I see you.'" Elsewhere, in a cramped office stacked with printouts, an astrophysicist stared at the latest orbital models and whispered, almost without realizing, "It's steering." The word hung in the air long after he left the room, heavier than any calculation. Governments moved quickly to suppress panic. Briefings spoke of natural explanations, of complex dynamics caused by Jupiter's pull, of uncertainties still under review. But the scientists knew better. They had run the numbers themselves. There was no uncertainty left. The object had shifted in ways no comet could. It was not drifting. It was aiming. Some clung to hope that the trajectory would stabilize again, that hidden forces would nudge it aside, that all of this was nothing more than a cosmic trick. But the data was merciless. Each night's measurement painted the same line across the charts, a line that intersected with Earth's orbit not years from now, but months. Still, even in the face of dread, there was wonder. For what kind of force could change the course of something so immense, hurtling through the void at impossible speeds? What kind of craft, if craft it was, could glide across interstellar space, then adjust itself with the precision of a surgeon's hand? To imagine such power was to imagine a civilization beyond all reckoning, a people whose science was like magic to us. And so humanity dreamed. Some dreamed of contact, of revelation, of being lifted from our small world into the vast family of stars. Others dreamed of conquest, of annihilation, of an intelligence so cold and vast that we would be no more to it than ants beneath a careless step. Across the globe, faiths responded in their own ways. Some declared it a sign of judgment, a herald of endings. Others saw in it proof of a greater plan, of guidance sent from beyond. Temples filled with prayers, churches with hymns, mosques with supplications. The longing for meaning, for comfort, was as ancient as the fear itself. Yet the object moved on, silent and unyielding. Each day the signal grew stronger, each night the flicker of light sharper. It was closer now than many of the asteroids routinely tracked by defense systems, and still, its mystery was unbroken. Scientists begged for more time, more funding, more data, as though knowledge itself could shield the Earth. But knowledge could only describe what was happening. It could not change it, and so the world waited, as crops were planted and harvested, as oceans rose and storms raged, as wars flared and quieted, as children were born and the elderly passed into silence. Life went on, as it always does, under the shadow of something vast and unexplainable. Perhaps that was the strangest part, not the object itself, not the panic it stirred in hidden halls of power, not even the signal whispering across the stars, but the simple endurance of ordinary days. For even with doom written in the heavens, the human heart clung to the rhythm of life, to laughter, to love, to the stubborn belief that morning would still come. But above that fragile rhythm of life, another rhythm pulsed, the signal of 3i Atlas, steady, unrelenting, closer with each passing night. And in its tone there was something new now, something subtle but unmistakable, not just a pulse, but a beckoning, a sound that drew not only instruments but minds, not only scientists but dreamers. It was no longer the sound of something distant, it was the sound of something arriving. And as the weeks dwindled into days, the truth could no longer be softened, no longer be hidden. 31ATLAS was on course for Earth.
The nights had grown quieter, though the world beneath them was anything but calm. By now, the news was everywhere, woven into every conversation, drifting through every headline, whispered at every bedside. 3-1 Atlas was no longer a distant anomaly. It was an approaching presence, a shadow pressing closer with every passing hour. Cities still glowed with their restless lights, but above them people turned their eyes toward the heavens, searching for even the faintest glimmer of the visitor. Some claimed they saw it already, a wandering star that did not belong among the constellations. Others watched only with instruments, measuring the slow arc of its path, the faint tremble of its signal. But, whether through science or through wonder, all knew the same truth. It was coming toward Earth. Scientists continued their work, though sleep came less and less easily. Some had moved beyond fear into a kind of awe that bordered on surrender. To witness such a thing was both gift and curse. They scribbled notes, adjusted telescopes, refined their models again and again. But the lines always converged on the same reality. The object was no longer bypassing us, it was aiming. And the signal, steady, unyielding, was louder than ever. Governments could not contain it any longer. Press conferences were held where solemn officials admitted what many already suspected. Yes, 3I Atlas had changed course. Yes, it was on a trajectory that brought it near Earth. No, they could not yet say why. They spoke of possibilities, of natural explanations, of strange gravitational currents and cosmic accidents. But their words rang hollow against the deeper, unspoken fear that this was not chance. The public reaction was as varied as humanity itself. Some fell into panic, hoarding supplies, fleeing cities, building shelters as though walls of concrete could protect against something born between stars. Others sought peace in faith, filling churches, temples, and mosques with candles and prayers. A quieter group simply turned inward, spending days with family, speaking words long unsaid, holding one another as though touch itself could anchor them against the vast uncertainty above. Artists painted visions of the approaching body, some depicting it as a harbinger of fire, others as a vessel of light. Musicians composed songs filled with haunting chords that carried both sorrow and hope. Writers filled page after page with speculation, weaving myths for a future that had not yet arrived. It was as though the human spirit, confronted with the incomprehensible, turned instinctively to creation. And still, the object came closer. Astronomers reported that its motion no longer resembled the drift of a rock. It pivoted with a smoothness that suggested intent. Each adjustment, subtle, precise, almost graceful. Its shimmer grew sharper, the way polished stone might reflect sunlight. Some frames captured flashes along its surface, like ripples racing across metal, though no one could say for certain what it meant. Was it alive? Was it mechanical? Was it both? The signal changed to what had been a steady rhythm began to layer itself, tones upon tones, harmonics intertwining like threads in a vast tapestry. To some ears it was simply noise. To others, it was music. Cryptographers tried to decode it, but every breakthrough collapsed into new puzzles. The closer it drew, the more elusive its meaning became. And yet people continued to listen, drawn to it as though to a lullaby. Reports of dreams became nearly universal among those who worked with the signal. Dreams of skies split open with light, of oceans calm and infinite, of voices speaking in languages not known yet somehow understood. Some dreamed of destruction, of fire raining down, of shadows consuming all. Others dreamed of doors opening, of gentle hands reaching through the void, of journeys to realms beyond imagining. The dreams did not agree, but they all carried the same weight: contact. There were those who argued that the panic was unnecessary, that fear was only the shadow we cast upon ourselves. They reminded the world that we had faced comets, asteroids, threats before, and endured it. But in quieter moments, even they admitted this was not the same. No rock, no ice, no fragment of matter had ever behaved this way. No object had ever sung across the void. It was no longer a question of whether it would come close. It was a question of what it would do when it arrived. And beneath that question lay another, quieter but deeper. What would we do? Would humanity face it as one, united in wonder and caution alike? Or would old divisions fracture further under the weight of fear? Already nations whispered in secret, debating weapons, strategies, responses. Already alliances shifted in the shadow of the unknown. Yet among ordinary people there was a different kind of unity, not political, not strategic, but human. A unity born of shared fragility, shared breath, shared sky. For in the face of the infinite, the lines we draw between us seemed suddenly small. The nights stretched longer, the days shorter, as if time itself had quickened. And through it all, 3-eye Atlas glided silently closer, indifferent to our hopes, our fears, our fragile dreams. Its presence filled the air, the earth, the very pulse of life, as though the planet itself had begun to hold its breath. Somewhere out there, in the deep velvet dark, a visitor had changed course toward Earth, and whether by accident or intention, it had already changed us.
The final weeks arrived like a tide, steady and unstoppable. Humanity had measured the days, had counted them down one by one, and now there were too few left to deny what was coming. The orbit had been confirmed beyond doubt. 3-1 ATLAS would pass near the Earth, close enough that even the most cautious voice could no longer speak of coincidence. The object had become visible to the naked eye, in certain parts of the world, faint, at first, a star that flickered where no star had been. Night after night, it grew brighter, until it could no longer be ignored. Crowds gathered in fields and on rooftops to see it, pointing, whispering, falling silent before the pale glow that crept slowly across the sky. Children asked their parents if it was a new moon, a new star, a new planet. The parents answered as best they could, though their voices carried a tremor they tried to hide. Scientists continued to monitor every moment, their reports shared daily with a world that listened in both awe and dread. The data told a story of deliberate movement, of slight shifts that kept the trajectory aligned. Its surface reflected light impulses that matched the strange, layered signal still streaming through the void. In that signal, it was no longer a single thread. It had become a chorus. Observers spoke of harmonics that intertwined in ways mathematics struggled to describe. Some claimed the tones mirrored Earth's own natural frequencies, echoing the resonances of our atmosphere, our oceans, even our bodies. As if the signal had learned to speak the language of our world. dreams, too deepened in intensity. Those who worked near the signal reported visions that grew more vivid, more urgent. Vast landscapes that did not belong to Earth unfolded before their closed eyes. Structures stretched into the sky, glowing with light that seemed alive. Sometimes, a figure appeared at the edge of vision, never fully seen, always just beyond reach, yet its presence lingered, calm, patient, expectant. There were whispers now, spoken in quiet circles. What if the object was not approaching us by chance, but by design? What if the signal was not a call, but an invitation? This thought frightened some and comforted others. It meant we were not alone, that intelligence greater than ours had noticed us, perhaps even chosen us. But it also meant we were the focus of something vast, something unknown, something that had crossed interstellar space, not to pass by, but to meet us. Governments, for all their secrecy, could no longer contain the truth. Announcements grew somber, measured, filled with words like historic, unprecedented, and contact. World leaders urged calm, unity, resilience. For once, even rivals spoke together. Standing before cameras with eyes heavy from sleepless nights, they admitted the reality. 3I Atlas was on approach. Its intentions remained unclear. And humanity, fragile as it was, could only wait. The streets told another story. In some places, fear erupted into chaos. Shelves emptied, roads clogged, voices rose in anger and despair. In others, people gathered quietly, lighting candles, holding vigils, singing songs into the night. There were those who celebrated, seeing in this event not doom, but deliverance. The divisions of belief, of culture, of expectation were vast, but all were bound by the same truth. The visitor was coming. Telescopes soon captured sharper images. What had once been a blur now revealed edges, symmetry, shapes too precise to be dismissed as random. It was long, elongated, its surface lined with ridges that glinted in the light of the sun. At times, faint arcs of illumination curved around it, as though fields unseen bent the light itself. It looked less like stone, more like craft, a vessel, silent and immense. And through it all, the signal continued, weaving itself into human thought, into human dreams, until some began to wonder if it had been shaping us all along. Was it possible the panic, the hope, the art, the visions, all had been gently guided by its unseen hand? Were we responding freely, or had we been answering a question we did not yet understand? The world balanced on the edge of revelation. Satellites tracked the object's approach with precision, predicting the exact hour it would pass near Earth. News stations counted down, their numbers echoing across every screen, every radio, every voice. Humanity, for the first time in its long history, was united in waiting, and as the object drew closer, the sky itself seemed to change. Nights grew brighter with its glow, a pale lantern drifting across the heavens. Animals stirred strangely, as if sensing a shift beyond the reach of human instruments. Oceans moved in ways tides could not explain, gentle but uncanny, as though the earth itself knew it was being watched. Then, something extraordinary happened. The signal shifted once more, and for the first time, it carried a pattern unmistakably clear. A pulse, a pause, a rhythm. Simple, deliberate, undeniable. It was not random, it was a greeting. The world held its breath. Somewhere, in the vast silence of space, 3-1, Atlas had spoken not only with mathematics, not only with harmonics, but with intention. It was reaching out. And in that moment, for all our fear, for all our uncertainty, the panic gave way to something older, something deeper, the spark of wonder that had driven us from caves to stars. For whether this visitor came as friend, foe, or judge, it had chosen us. And the universe, for the first time in our memory, was no longer silent. The final night arrived like a story unfolding to its last page. The object now shone brightly in the sky, a pale beacon that even those in crowded cities could see with their naked eyes. It was no longer a rumor, no longer a line of numbers on a chart, but a presence that glowed above the horizon, undeniable and unshakable. People gathered everywhere, on rooftops, in fields, by oceans, on balconies. All looked upward, as though the heavens themselves had opened. For some, fear was overwhelming. They clutched each other, whispered prayers, or wept in silence. For others, there was only wonder, a kind of stillness that came with finally witnessing what generations had only imagined. Children stared with wide eyes, asking questions no adult could answer. And across the world, humanity shared the same sky, bound together by awe and uncertainty. In observatories, instruments strained to capture every detail. The object now filled their frames, sharp and immense, revealing structures that defied explanation. Its surface gleamed with a strange radiance, marked by patterns that seemed deliberate, too intricate to belong to chance. Lines curved and intersected like architecture, as if someone, somewhere, had built it with purpose. The signal grew louder still, no longer faint, but rich and resonant, as though the air itself carried its song. And then, in a moment that no one would ever forget, the pattern shifted again. Not random, not chaotic, but clear. A sequence of tones, rising and falling in a cadence that mirrored the beating of a heart. And for the first time in history, the Earth answered. Transmitters around the globe, synchronized by scientists working in rare unity, sent back a reply. Simple, cautious, yet filled with meaning, a repetition of the signal, mirrored back, pulse for pulse. Humanity, fragile and small, had spoken into the void. There was silence at first, a silence so deep it seemed to stretch forever, but then the reply came, layered and vast, a chorus of tones that wrapped themselves around our signal, weaving with it, embracing it. It was not language as we knew it, but it was communication. The universe had spoken back. Reactions rippled across the planet. In homes, people clung to each other, some crying, some laughing. In places of worship, prayers rose like waves. In streets and fields, strangers embraced. For all the fear, all the panic, all the endless speculation, the truth was simple. We were not alone. Yet the object did not descend. It did not hover closer, nor unleash destruction, nor extend an invitation. It remained in the sky, luminous and silent once more, its signal steady but gentle, like a candle flickering in the dark. Scientists debated endlessly what it meant. Some said it was satisfied with our reply, that it had come to see if we were ready, and now it would move on. Others believed this was only the beginning, a first step in a dialogue that could take years, decades, even centuries. But whatever its purpose, its presence had already changed us. Borders seemed smaller, divisions less sharp. Even if only for a moment, humanity had looked up together, listened together, and spoken as one. The realization that the stars were not empty, that the universe was not silent, had woven itself into the very fabric of our being. Nights passed. The object began to drift again, its path bending away, its glow fading ever so slowly. It did not vanish in an instant, but receded like the tide, leaving behind a sky that seemed at once emptier and fuller than ever before. The signal weakened, softer each day, until it became a whisper, then a memory. But humanity knew, something had been exchanged, something had been shared. Children would grow remembering the nights they watched the sky with their parents, the nights when the world fell quiet and listened. Artists would continue to paint and write, capturing the sense of mystery that had blanketed the earth. Scientists would devote their lives to decoding the fragments of that signal, hoping one day to fully understand. And dreamers, lying awake beneath the stars, would close their eyes and wonder what waited beyond. Perhaps 3I, Atlas, had come only to remind us of our place in the cosmos. Small, fragile, but not alone. Perhaps it had come as a test, to see if we were capable of listening, capable of answering, capable of hope. Or perhaps it was only passing by, carrying its own story, its own destiny, gliding through the universe with a grace we could scarcely imagine. Whatever the truth, its course had changed more than the path of a celestial body. It had changed the course of us. And so, as the sky returned to its familiar stars, humanity settled into a new rhythm, carrying with it the memory of the visitor that had aimed itself toward Earth, the memory of the night when the universe spoke, and Earth whispered back. Now, as you lie here in the quiet, listening to the gentle rhythm of your own breath, imagine the vast silence of the cosmos above you. Imagine the stars not as distant fires, but as windows into countless mysteries, waiting to be discovered. Somewhere out there, perhaps 3I Atlas still drifts, its signal faint but enduring, carrying with it the echo of our reply. And as you drift toward sleep, let that thought carry you gently, that we are part of a story far larger than ourselves. A story written not just in fear, but in wonder, that the universe is not silent, and neither are we. Rest now, under the same stars that once carried a voice across the void. For tomorrow, and the tomorrows after, we will still look upward, still listen, still dream, and perhaps, someday, we will answer again. And so, our journey with 3I Atlas comes to a gentle close. What began as fear, as panic, unfolded into wonder, a reminder that the universe still holds secrets beyond imagination. Tonight, as you drift into rest, carry with you the thought that we are never truly alone under the stars. If you found comfort in this story, I invite you to stay with us on this channel. Subscribe, leave a quiet thought in the comments, and return whenever you wish to wander again through science, mystery, and the calm of the cosmos. Until our next story, breathe deeply, rest easily, and let the universe watch over your dreams.